Chapter 50. A Fat Otaku's Happy Dream. Perhaps it was the increase in his power that made his heart feel more secure. He no longer had the strange dream of going to Vienna's Golden Hall to play the little widow visits a grave. After he woke up, he sat in the garden and practiced for 2 hours as usual. Huai Shi received a call from Ai Qing. "Go out now and wait at the door. Someone will come and fetch you," she said. "We have found Wang Hai's trail." In fact, without the need for the country's machinery, even with the help of the Xin Hai Special Affairs Division, they were able to sift through the whole of Xin Hai. With Ai Qing's surveillance through the Astronomy Society and the channel among the normal people, the two sides started to cooperate, and the whole of Xin Hai became a glass fish tank. Everything was clear. Under his crazy provocation, in just 1 day's time, almost all the foreign migrants were exposed. After the local people with criminal records were dragged out and beaten several times, through the ubiquitous surveillance and investigation, they finally found Wang Hai's trail. In a deserted mountain outside the city, inside a manor that had been abandoned for many years. In other words, the second place on the Xin Hai haunted house ranking. After Huai Shi found out about this, he almost laughed out of anger. "What the F***ck? What are you planning? Are you trying to steal my first place on the haunted house ranking?" After confirming the traces of Wang Hai's entry and exit through the surveillance cameras, the Special Affairs Division was already in full swing. Countless macho men sharpened their knives and jumped into the cars, ready to go. It seemed that Division Chief Fu was really angered by the bomb. After Huai Shi arrived, he was shoved into Ai Qing's car, and they headed out of the city. In less than half an hour, Huai Shi, who was stuffed into a bulletproof vest and wearing a helmet, arrived at the foot of a deserted mountain in a daze. The satellite has finished its investigation. There are traces of human activity in the manor. The person who was sent to investigate the scene came back to report. There is a target that has a high chance of matching Wang Hai's body shape, but it is uncertain. Should we get on the drone? Drones are too easy to spot. Director Fu looked through the binoculars for a long time and began to discuss the attack plan with his men, according to the manor's map. As a member of the Astronomical Society and the only sublimator fighter, Huai Shi was also stuffed into the list of the first batch to enter the manor. He was still trembling. "How do I use this thing? Where's the insurance?" He tried to pretend that he didn't recognize the automatic rifle in his hand and wanted to escape by a fluke. In the end, he was tied up in the car by the hunk. "Wait, I'm a victim too. Why do I have to participate in the attack?" He clung to the door, unwilling to go up. He cried loudly, "Even if you want to find a ascendant, go find Old Lu. Old Lu's ability was so powerful. I'm just a cello player. All I can do is conjure up an axe to embarrass myself. Can you please let me go? What the F***ck? Don't hit people, don't hit people's faces. I've done great things for Xin Hai, I've shed blood for the Astronomy Association, I want to see Ai Qing. I want to see Ai Qing." Ai Qing, who sat in the car, moved her gaze away expressionlessly. She couldn't help but sigh. "Oh well, let him come with me." Director Fu couldn't stand it anymore. He waved his hand to signal for his men to stop arguing. If they continued, this B***starred would start yelling things like, "The Special Affairs Division is beating people up." TSK. What were young people thinking these days? So, Yu Dongri was such a good person. As long as his sentence was reduced, he was willing to go to the lion's den. If he had known, he would have arrested the B***starred and sent him to jail for a few years. He sighed and lowered his head to look at the blueprint on the table. The abandoned manor on the mountain had been around for many years. Actually, there were many abandoned buildings like this around Xin Hai. Most of them were built during the golden age of Xin Hai's economy more than 90 years ago. As the economy declined, the number of rich people dwindled, and the nearby real estate industry declined as well. Who knew how many houses under construction had been turned into unfinished buildings? Even now, there was still a long Ma building in the old city that hadn't been completed. Calculating the time, it was around the same time as the Stone Marrow Museum. However, this place no longer had unlucky people like Huai Shi to guard it. Instead, it had long been abandoned by the wind and rain. Only a few graveyard keepers at the back of the mountain had slightly modified the few houses to serve as accommodation. Later, due to the rumors of ghosts, even the graveyard had been abandoned, and the place had completely fallen into ruin. Now, based on the surveillance from the satellite, there were several traces of activity at the old manor. Other than Wang Hai, there might be other ascendants. The last backbone of the Salvation Society was probably hiding there. There might even be reinforcements sent by the organization behind the scenes. Once he thought about what kind of crazy person was trying to stir up trouble in Xin Hai, he couldn't help but have a headache. Is everything ready? After confirming it several times, Director Fu also checked the weapons and bulletproof vests that he carried with him. Then, he led the way into the car of the first batch of commandos. We're starting the operation just like that? Regarding this, Ai Qing was confused. Very soon, she raised her hand to signal. Wait a minute, let me make a call. At the same time, inside the abandoned manor on the mountain, inside the ruins of the main building that was about to collapse, a shadow was crawling behind the broken wall. He was using a telescope to look down the mountain. Are you sure the guy from the astronomy club will take the bait? The spy held the phone and was rather agitated. We've been waiting here for 2 days already. How come there is no sign of him at all? Don't worry, he'll be here soon. Wang Hai's voice came from the phone. I purposely went to the city to take a look. If there is still no sign of him, the Special Affairs Division will be dissolved. This time, God has given you the last chance, the spy said unhappily. The spy said unhappily, think about how to atone for your crime. I don't see the use of catching a little brat. As he spoke, he whistled twice in a low voice to pacify the shadows hiding in the ruins. Those beasts were restless, as if they had smelled fresh blood. It's easier to negotiate with a hostage. What do you know? Wang Hai's voice on the phone became unhappy. If we're lucky, we might be able to wipe out the astronomy club in Xin Hai. Then, what plan won't work? They've gone up the mountain, and there's also the army from the Special Affairs Division. Don't let anything happen to you. 4 ascendants, 10 shadow beasts, and 90 retribution demons. Even if the army from the Special Affairs Division is here, it won't end well. The spy revealed a bloodthirsty smile. I'd like to see if that cowherd and that female cripple are as powerful as you make them out to be. Pa. The call was cut off. The strange shadow curled up in the darkness and retracted all of his presence like a hibernating snake. The whole manor was instantly silenced, and there was no sound. The chirping of birds and insects appeared again, and it made the ruins look even more eerie. The speeding motorcade came to an abrupt stop halfway up the mountain. At the base, at the foot of the mountain, someone moved out a mortar. Following the direction of the command, it roared. Soon, the cannonballs fell from the sky and blasted the entire eastern side of the manor into dust. Amidst the flying dust, a giant crater was exposed on the ground. There was still no movement, but the sound of panicked screams could be heard coming from inside the manor. Should we continue? Division Head Fu, who was sitting in the passenger seat with a pair of binoculars, asked. Wait a minute. Ai Qing, who was in the car, looked up at the manor. She raised her phone expressionlessly and said to the other end, I need a longsword for cleaning. 3 minutes later, there was a shrill wail in the sky. The black shadow of a steel bird broke through the clouds and flew across the ground at supersonic speed. Under the wings of the bird, a pure white steel arrow drew an arc in the air and landed on the ground. At that moment, the shadow on the rooftop widened his eyes in shock. What the hell? There was a bang. The thing landed on the ground. In the next moment, There was a violent roar and flames rising from the ground. The entire mountain shook slightly. Amidst the gushing flames and the sweeping air pressure, the ruined manor once again wailed and groaned under the violent ravages. Amidst the terrifying explosion, the sweeping air pressure completely crushed the entire manor into ruins. Countless steel shards scattered death in all directions, and sharp sounds kept bursting out from them. A huge depression appeared in the middle of the manor. The lava soil flowed on the blackened ground, and the stench of smoke and dust spread in the violent wind. Missile! There was no time to react. A low whistling sound burst out from the sky again. The shadow of the steel bird came back. After throwing something in the air, it flew to the end of the line of sight. There was only a dull sound that spread in the air. Immediately after, white smoke extended towards the ground along with something. It was like a tree that grew upside down. It was as if a cruel angel had dropped its wings from the clouds. Holy light and pure white smoke covered the ground, bringing about equal burning and destruction. The terrifying temperature burst forth the moment those darn things landed. Green and red flames spewed out from them. The scorching hot febrile wind enveloped every corner. It was like a thin layer of white gauze. Everything that it enveloped was enveloped by the terrifying flames. The flames danced wildly in the soil, on the stones, on the ruins, and on the flesh. The temperature that was enough to burn steel into liquid brought about poisonous smoke and thick fog that destroyed the lungs. It only took an instant for the destruction brought by the white phosphorus incendiary bomb to completely descend on the ruins. The dancing white phosphorus vapor and the surging flames permeated every inch of the place. Burn, burn, burn. First, there was the terrifying impact of the missile. Then, there was the terrifying temperature of the white phosphorus. Finally, there was the poisonous fog that completely destroyed all living things. The entire mountain was shrouded in destruction. On the mountainside, everyone stared dumbfoundedly at this scene of destruction. They watched as dozens of ghostly creatures that were several meters tall screamed and escaped from the flames. They struggled and rolled on the ground, scraping the green flames off their white bones. However, soon after, vicious flames reignited from their bone marrow. In the end, they crawled on the ground and stopped moving. Only the remains of their bodies that slowly turned into charcoal in the flames and the sound of bones breaking in the burning. The group of people looked at the ruins in front of them in shock. Director Fu turned to look at Ai Qing. "You don't want them to live? Weren't the white phosphorus incendiary bombs banned? Those who can live are the ones who live." Ai Qing calmly waved her hand. "There must be something wrong with people who talk about humanitarian when facing terrorists. Okay, you can go now," Ai Qing ordered. Finally, she looked at Huaishur. "You can go now. You will go, right?" "Yes, yes, yes." Huaishur nodded like he was pounding garlic. "I am a brick of the Astronomical Association. I will go wherever I am needed. Men, bring me my fire Kirin AK." Chapter 51. Soon, Huaishur, who was armed with an automatic rifle and a gas mask, was kicked out of the car. He followed the muscular brothers of the Sublimator Suppression Force into the manor that was still burning. As far as the eye could see, it was a white land. In the wasteland and ruins that had been burned to ashes, huge monsters could be seen constantly. Whether it was the still horribly hard scales or the hideous skeletons, they seemed to have come from hell. No matter how one looked at it, it didn't look like a strange appearance that could be formed by natural evolution. Other than that, there was only dead silence in the manor. The further they went, the colder Huaishur's heart became. What the hell were these bastards hiding here? Even now, there were still wisps of black gas slowly rising from the white ashes and dissipating in the air. The strong soldiers wearing gas masks seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure here. Their legs went weak and they staggered to the ground. Their teammates hurriedly dragged them out of the field to receive first aid. But Huaishur seemed to be fine. Not only did he not feel any discomfort, but he was also very conscious. His body's reaction speed and perception began to become more sensitive. Abyssal sediment. This place has been transformed into a feeding ground. The concentration of the sediment in the abyssal abyss is even higher than at the border. In response, AI Ching replied in the communication. Appropriate pressure will make your soul circulate faster, just like diving. But for ordinary people who haven't cast their souls, this sediment is highly toxic. This is the favorite trick of the cultists. Huai Shi picked up the rifle and looked around carefully. What are they trying to do? Who knows? Maybe they want to play a big game? AI Ching's tone was calm. Once the main force enters here, they will use the mark bestowed by God to increase the depth of this place. It's like stuffing us into the stomach of something. The black gas you see is equivalent to gastric juice. When the time comes, it will be slowly digested. Huai Shi's hair stood on end. He shrunk his neck and became more and more vigilant. Although the Special Affairs Division was powerful, it was still within the system after all. There were many inconveniences. At most, they would use a few rounds of mortars. Even if she was a terrorist, who would have thought that there would be such a lame woman in the decision-making level who had such an abnormal brain circuit that she would release a missile just because of a disagreement? They were still in China. What are you doing? Not only the Allies, but even the spirits of those unlucky bastards in heaven would be puzzled. Fortunately, AI Ching's heavenly justice and white phosphorus incendiary bombs had cleansed the place thoroughly. Not a single bug was left in the manor. Even if there were some rotten fish and prawns that were not killed by the explosion, their lungs would be burned by the poisonous gas, and they would fall to the ground. Huai Shi saw a hideous corpse in the innermost layer of the ruins. It seemed to have been in the range of destruction when the missile exploded. Half of its body was charred, but it did not die on the spot. Instead, it struggled to escape. Then, he was engulfed by the white phosphorus incendiary bombs that fell from the sky. He was burned alive in the flames that were like maggots in a tarsal bone, turning into a pile of twisted charcoal. One could vaguely make out a beast-like face. Half of the face was charred and half broken, revealing a broken skull like that of an ape. Its teeth were huge and sharp, but after a slight knock with the barrel of a gun, it broke into two pieces. Although you have science and I have magic, it was proven that magic could not beat science. Although it was not clear what level the Ascendant was, or what kind of strange stigmata it had in the present realm, it could not withstand the suppression of the steel torrent. It was said that in the old magic era everything was not like this, but with the establishment of the three major blockades in the present realm, it became more and more difficult for the Ascendants to mess around in the present realm. As for the details, Crow said that he would tell Huai Shi after he officially implanted the stigmata, but before that, he did not take the initiative to mention anything. It was probably a secret that had been hidden. After Huai Shi made one last check that there were no hidden dangers, he waved his hand behind him. A few soldiers wearing chemical protective suits carried a huge box over and neatly threw the corpse into the box, sealed it, and took it away. The body of the Ascendant was also valuable. Even if it was burned into a piece of charcoal, it might still be able to decompose the remains of the stigmata, and through an autopsy, it might be able to directly identify the Ascendant's identity. Unfortunately, the burning of the incendiary bomb was too thorough, and the corpse was smashed into pieces as soon as it touched the ground. It was impossible to piece it back together. Huai Shi continued to move forward, but after 2 steps, he felt that something was wrong, so he stepped back and bent down to wipe the white ashes on the ground. Through the ashes on the ground that had not yet dissipated, he saw the light of metal, and as he continued to dig, he could distinguish the outline of steel. It was a short sword. The guard had been burned out of shape, but the bracelet on the hilt was also almost charred, but the body of the sword was still intact, except that it was covered with a layer of black charcoal. It was about 40 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide, with a single-edged blade. It looked like some kind of ceremonial weapon, but when Huai Shi tried to cut it, it felt very smooth. It did not seem like a good thing. He weighed it in his hand, and felt that it was not an ordinary object. It's a relic from the border. Crow's voice mysteriously sounded in his ear. It should be the result of digging in the 7th or 8th level of hell, and looking at the style, it's a sacrificial knife used by the Tenochtitlan Empire for live sacrifice. Good stuff. Crow, who was hiding in the shadow, looked at him sneakily, his small eyes blinking. Can you find a way to steal it? Where did you come from? And what the hell are you thinking? Huai Shi asked through the Book of Destiny. There are people watching behind, how can I hide? Isn't it common to steal equipment in a group? Crow shrugged. Also, be careful behind you. At that moment, a gust of wind broke through the air. A chill ran down the back of his head. Huai Shi did not hesitate, and the sacrificial knife in his hand blocked behind him, and only heard a sharp noise. His whole body was almost sent flying by the huge force. Fortunately, he was no longer the rookie he used to be, and with a somersault in the air, he turned around and landed, already facing behind him. Then, he saw the figure slowly emerging from the air. The first thing he saw was sticky blood dripping from the charred body, and with the movement of the muscles, countless small bright red cracks appeared on the charred skin. Then, he saw countless charred skin slowly peeling off. It was like a snake shedding its skin. It broke free of the old shell and death. It welcomed a new life. In the painful convulsions, the burned dead skin fell off the body bit by bit, but the new skin did not seem to have time to grow, only revealing a layer of bloody and twisted face. And a pair of venomous eyes. Huai Shi sucked in a cold breath. Brother, do you want me to call an ambulance for you? That was what he said, but his body was not honest at all. He threw away the sacrificial knife in his hand, picked up the automatic rifle, and shot forward. Within 10 meters, he accurately controlled the gun, emptying a magazine in a few seconds, and then skillfully pulled out a new one from the back of the rapid reaction vest, changed the magazine with one hand, and continued to shoot. What a joke! If he did not shoot, would he wait for the other party to come over and stab him a few more times? Huai Shi was not confident that he could go head-to-head with this kind of powerhouse who could survive the incendiary bomb. How could he win? Let's shoot first and talk later. After the training in the Book of Destiny, Huai Shi did not dare to call himself the Gun King, but he was no longer the rookie who did not even know how to control the gun. Changing the magazine with one hand, which he had learned this morning, almost made the eyes of the suppression team behind him pop out. Soon Takashi, you still say you don't know martial arts. As early as Huai Shi pulled the trigger, the strange figure tried to dodge. Perhaps he did not expect Huai Shi to react so quickly, and did not even take the border relics in his hand. When he saw Huai Shi throw something, he subconsciously pounced forward, trying to snatch the weapon back. But bullets were always faster than people, and in an instant 20 steel core bullets pierced through him, turning him into a bloody gourd, and the ground was covered in strange green blood. While Huai Shi was reloading, he had already rolled and crawled into the broken wall behind the ruins. The strong men behind the suppression team were not incompetent. At first, they were stunned for a moment, but when they reacted, a hail of bullets rained down, almost turning the broken wall into a sieve. Huai Shi changed the magazine, took the time to pick up the border relics from the ground, and casually inserted it into his vest. He was not in a hurry to check the results behind the wall. He reached into the pockets of his allies and took out a few iron sweet potatoes, pulled out the bolts, and threw them out with all his might. Before the sound of the explosion could be heard, a shadow shot out from behind the broken wall, screaming shrilly, and pounced straight at Huai Shi. Bang! Huai Shi subconsciously pulled out his sword to block, and felt the military knife in his hand break from the middle. He took the opportunity to fall on his back, and felt something cold brush past his face. It was bone-chilling. It was a sharp bone spur. The chaotic gunfire stopped abruptly, and the soldiers who surrounded him fell to the ground as if they had lost all their strength. Even through the gas mask, Huai Shi still smelled a sweet fragrance, and his vision blurred. Poison! He raised his hand and threw out a handful of ash, forcing the shadow to retreat. When he got up from the ground, he felt weak. It was only now that he finally saw the true face of the intruder. After the baptism of missile bombardment and incendiary bombs, the man looked like he had shed a layer of skin, and a layer of pink scales could be vaguely seen under the new skin. There were 3 strange horns on his forehead, and they were actually of 3 different colors. What the hell? Don't be a coward, kill him. Crow's voice sounded in his ear, encouraging him. The crying snake stigmata is only level 2, and it can only survive because it has a strong soul. That poison is not as strong as the one I feed you every day. Can you King shut up? Huai Shi was furious. And what exactly do you feed me every day? Before he could angrily rebuke that bastard, the crying snake had already pounced on him again, the bone spur in his hand stabbing straight at Huai Shi's throat. His movements were swift and fierce, and his speed was astonishing. However, his posture seemed to be making Huai Shi laugh. Bro, can you do it? Huai Shi easily dodged the sudden attack, and suddenly pulled out the sacrificial knife in front of his chest. The handle of the knife turned in the air, and his 5 fingers turned upside down as he stabbed downwards. The 2 figures passed by each other, and before Huai Shi could stand firm, he heard a mournful scream behind him. From the shoulder to the back, the crying snake's body had been cut open by the sacrificial knife, revealing the color of the bones below. When the sacrificial knife saw blood, the layer of ash on it seemed to have been washed away, revealing the bronze color below. The flowing blood seemed to have been absorbed by the blade, and it gathered on the blade, moving thread by thread. However, the wound caused by the knife did not bleed at all. Instead, it dried up like a piece of wood. It looked frightening. Chapter 52. So powerful? Huai Shi was stunned at first, then he was overjoyed. His confidence began to swell, and this time, he took the initiative to attack without waiting for the opponent to attack again. The length of the sacrificial knife was not exaggerated. It was just a little longer than an ordinary dagger, and there was no problem with Huai Shi's dagger fighting. The LV-8 Roman dagger fighting technique was not inferior to the red gloves of the past. It had reached the top of the professional level. It could be said that there was no longer a trace of fancy, and it had become an out-and-out killing technique. Suddenly, the crying snake felt a burst of grief and anger. It had survived the bombing with great difficulty, but before it could react, it was already surrounded. Originally, it wanted to take back the holy artifact bestowed by the Lord and find a noob to trample on to vent its anger. However, it did not expect that its attack would be like stabbing into Page's nest. Where did such a monster jump out from? Not only did he have a strange reaction and was not afraid of snake venom, but his swordsmanship was also frighteningly fierce. Under the situation where he did not have a stigmata, he directly jumped 2 levels and beat it like a child. Get lost! It roared with all its might, and the bone blade directly blocked Huai Shi's knife. It turned around and wanted to escape, but it saw that there was a row of people behind it. Seeing that it wanted to escape, it was met with a hail of bullets, forcing it to confront Huai Shi head-on and capture it alive. The crying snake was so angry that it wanted to laugh. Even if it was suppressed in weapon fighting, it was a second-stage gold ascendant. How could it be afraid of a noob who did not even have a stigmata? It would take a hostage first. Ignoring Huai Shi's fierce attacks, the teeth in its mouth suddenly grew, and it spat out a wisp of clear venom. Then, the venom quickly evaporated in the air, turning into wisps of white mist. Wherever it passed, even the stones were corroded into holes. Huai Shi was shocked and quickly retreated, but the crying snake seized the opportunity and took the initiative. One hand reached out and grabbed the blood-sucking blade, ignoring the danger, and the other hand reached out to grab Huaishi's neck. Then, he blacked out and heard the endless roar of gunfire. With one hand holding the knife, Huaishi's other hand had already pulled out the pistol on his vest, pressed it against his forehead, and pulled the trigger repeatedly. The small-caliber bullet couldn't even penetrate his skull, but the impact of the bullet wasn't inferior to the penetrating damage. He was completely stunned in an instant, and he didn't know if his brain had been shaken out. Let go. Huaishi pulled out the sacrificial blade in his hand and swung it down with all his might. As the blade sliced through the air, pale white origin flame ignited in his hand. He added the weight of the axe to the blade and chopped off one of Huaishi's arms. He then pulled out the blade and swung it down again. Both of his arms were cleanly chopped off. After absorbing enough blood, the damaged sacrificial blade actually began to rapidly repair itself, returning to its original bright and beautiful appearance. It was as if it had just come out of the furnace, and it even began to misbehave, attempting to absorb Huaishi's origin substance. Devour my origin substance? Are you kidding me? Huaishi was amused. You even dare to devour my negative energy-producing machine? Little bro, are you kidding me? He directly turned the ashes back into origin substance, then poured a large amount of heart poison into the sacrificial blade, allowing it to absorb as much as it wanted. At first, it was still sucking in large mouthfuls of origin substance, but when it felt that something was wrong, it tried to stop. However, the hand of confinement grabbed the blade and poured it in. It drank to its heart's content, as if it was drinking chilly water. In the end, the blade began to tremble violently and let out a whine, as if it was begging for mercy. The pure negative energy and the poison of death that was even purer than that caused it to suffer greatly. It was once again reduced to a dusty appearance, and was held in Huaishi's hands like a grandson. It was extremely obedient. Now that he was done with internal security, it was time to deal with external security. Huaishi raised the sacrificial blade and turned it around, slashing it fiercely at the crying snake. The hand of confinement's terrifying weight wasn't inferior to that of an axe. Very quickly, the crying snake spasmed on the ground and stopped moving. It could only be said that a tiger had fallen from grace. This gold-rank expert, who should have been able to beat Huaishi up in a direct confrontation, had actually been beaten up by Huaishi after being bombarded with missiles and incendiary bombs. In fact, Crow had even secretly peeled off 3 of the gold-rank expert's horns. This thing was worth a lot of money. The crying snake's stigmata's poison essence was inside. With a bit of refinement, it could be used to create an antidote for most neurotoxins. It can probably be sold for a few tens of thousands. Crow paused for a moment, then added 1 gram. Upon hearing this, Huaishi, who had originally been a bit hesitant, decided to take the risk. Good stuff. This kind of high-tier ascended expert really was full of treasures. After Huaishi was done, the suppression team, who had been waiting for a long time, rushed up and put layers of shackles on the dying crying snake. First, it was shackles that bound the body, followed by an explosive collar that blocked the stigmata, followed by several tubes of red and green medicine that were injected into the carotid artery through a syringe gun. In the end, a 7 to 8 centimeters long nail was nailed into the neck, causing the corners of Huaishi's eyes to twitch wildly. Did they have to be so ruthless? The ferocious brothers of the suppression team all had calm expressions, waving their hands to indicate that this was just a basic operation. He didn't know if Director Fu wanted to make an example out of Wang Zhong, warning him to not mess around in the present world. It seemed that this was the only fish that had escaped the net. Huaishi once again searched the ruins, but this time, nothing jumped out to stab him in the back. Unfortunately, he didn't find any trace of Wang Hai, not even his corpse. Logically speaking, a weakling like him who wasn't even an ascended expert should have died when the missile exploded, but Huaishi still had some doubts in his heart. That guy's life was so tough that even the red gloves couldn't kill him. Now that he couldn't find his corpse, It was hard to say where he was hiding to cause trouble. In the distant forest, the crow whistled and looked in the direction of another hill. As early as when the missile fell from the sky, the figure lying in wait in the dark had already turned around and fled, like an old farmer who had stolen a watermelon but was shot by a cannon. He abandoned his companions and fled madly, not even looking back. It could only be said that Wang Hai's ability to flee in the face of danger was much better than his ability to plot and scheme. From the beginning to the end, the crow, who was watching from the side, saw everything, but he didn't say anything. He only shook his wings, and a feather fell. The feather fluttered and landed on his exposed nape. Like diluted ink, it melted and turned into a sunburn mark. What kind of fish could be caught in this quagmire if the bait was thrown out? It was very curious. Well done. Ai Qing calmly glanced at the crying snake in the cage. No, it should be said that we caught a big fish. Director Fu looked at the burned ruins and sighed helplessly. The Astronomy Association calling for an air raid was cool, but the people responsible for cleaning up the scene were from the Special Affairs Division. He could only sigh at the fact that there were indeed some people in this group who were tough. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be able to find someone to record a statement. He really couldn't figure out where Ai Qing's Russian Federation style of hardcore logic came from. However, he also had to thank her for her rash and extreme decision, which successfully avoided a tragic ambush. Just looking at the remains of those damned things at the scene was enough to give him a headache. Compared to this, what gave him a bigger headache was, how did so many mutants from the border appear in the present realm? These damned things were enough to fight a head-on encounter with a modern army. He irritably lit a cigarette. What the hell are the people at the customs doing? Although I really want to teach those good-for-nothings a lesson, unfortunately, these things have nothing to do with customs. Ai Qing sighed regretfully and raised a new conjecture. What if they weren't smuggled in from the border, but raised in the present realm? Director Fu was stunned at first, then immediately frowned. If that was the case, it would explain where the money and supplies that the Savior Society had plundered all this time had gone, and where the privileges they had obtained from climbing to the top had been used. But this also meant that the seriousness of the matter had increased again. Ironically, for so many years, the shadow of the Savior Society had been quietly developing in the coastal areas, and the Special Affairs Division had no idea. In the end, it was a terrorist organization like Green Sun that exposed them. It could be expected that someone in the dark must have been covering up for them, so that they could thrive. What was even more troublesome was that the mutants from the border were not creatures like chickens, ducks, pigs, and sheep that could thrive by simply feeding them grassroots. Their requirements for the environment were even more stringent than some protected animals. Whether it was the air, food, or even the depth of the environment, it would all affect their development and growth. Other than the giant biological experiment mechanism Survival Institute that had been closed by the Astronomy Society, there were very few institutions that could have this ability. And coincidentally, among them, there was an organization that was famous for its ability to raise mutants from the border, the Purified People. Almost groaning, Director Fu rubbed his head and spat out the name. Damn, this is a big problem. Are you sure? Isn't there a ready-made test subject? Ai Qing raised her chin and looked at the sublimator in the cage. Her eyes became meaningful. If it's really that group of lunatics, you definitely won't be able to get anything out of them. It's better to make use of the waste. The moment all the purified people use external forces to complete the sublimator, their souls will be branded with the mark of their Lord. From then on, everything they have, including their lives and bodies, every drop of blood, and every piece of flesh will belong to the final Lord. In the paradise of hell, whether it's believers or messengers, all living things are just food reserves. Once they are judged to have lost their value, it's time for the Lord to feast on them. As she spoke, she looked at Director Fu. Director Fu's expression changed. After a long time, He sighed helplessly and waved his hand. Do as you wish. I'll sign it later. Thus, Ai Qing withdrew her gaze in satisfaction and waved at Huaishur. Huaishur, who was having fun at the side, was startled. He looked around him, and after confirming that Ai Qing was calling him, he instinctively felt uneasy. Old tie. He dawdled on the spot, not wanting to go over. Even if I'm a brick in the Astronomy Society, it's not appropriate to move me around every day, right? Don't worry. I'm not asking you to go through fire and water. Ai Qing pointed at the sacrificial knife in his pocket. Give me that thing. Huaishur hesitated for a moment before finally taking out the knife. He turned the handle around and handed it to her. Be careful. This thing is very evil. It's just a D-class border relic. The risks are still within the acceptable range. Ai Qing took out a handkerchief without a care. She wrapped the handle around it and held it in her hand. After leaving Huaishur's hand, the thing began to be disobedient again. It kept trembling and letting out a low cry that made one's scalp numb. Ai Qing supported herself with her walking stick and got up from the wheelchair. She held the knife in her other hand and walked forward expressionlessly. Through the cage, the blade pierced the throat of the sublimator. Pa. Chapter 53. Bang. It was as if a balloon filled with water had been smashed. Blood gushed out, but when the blood fell on the blade, it quickly disappeared and was completely absorbed by the blade. As the blood flowed in, the gap on the blade quickly grew and recovered. It was as if time had reversed. In the end, the bronze blade had beautiful golden lines. It had turned from a fake antique to a real work of art. It looked exquisite, as if it had been cast with life. Ai Qing took a step back. Ignoring the violent and thirsty cry from the blade, she coldly pulled the blade out of the crying snake's throat, shook off the blood on the blade, and returned it to Huaishur. It's still useful. Although it's a bit greedy, it's still okay to deal with living creatures with blood. This kind of prohibited item will cause a lot of trouble in the market. You should take care of it carefully. She glanced at Director Fu, who wanted to say something but was hesitating. After all, it's also the responsibility of the Astronomical Association to store dangerous items. In this way, she forcefully classified this border relic, which had a threat level above C, as D, and then classified it as belonging to the Astronomical Association in the name of storage. Once she changed hands, this thing was surnamed Huai. Wasn't this a bit too much? Before he could object, Director Fu heard a sound that made his hair stand on end. On the corpse that was gradually losing its vitality, the temperature had yet to disperse, but no more blood spurted out from the wound. Instead, it was replaced by wisps of black smoke that rose from the limbs and bones. The black smoke was like a viscous liquid, covering the crying snake ascendant's corpse inch by inch, as if it was swallowing it into its stomach. Then, there was a creepy chewing sound. Every time there was a chewing sound, a huge gap would appear on the corpse, as if something invisible was constantly gnawing on it. In the end, the black smoke dissipated silently. In the layers of shackles, only a pale skeleton was left. Whether it was the soul, the flesh, or even the bone marrow, it had completely disappeared without a trace. Even if it was thrown into a pot to boil soup for a long time, it would probably only be a pot of boiling water. Even the calcium was so scarce that there was no room for absorption. A gentle breeze blew over, and it silently disappeared into a cloud of dust. Just like that, the short banquet ended in everyone's dazed expression. Then, I'll leave the rest to you. Ai Qing nodded calmly at Director Fu. I will submit a request for assistance to the higher-up. When the time comes, please cooperate with the Social Security Bureau and the Special Affairs Division. Director Fu was silent for a long time before he nodded dryly. Next, it was up to the Special Affairs Department to clean up the scene. Thanks to Ai Qing's style, Huaishur once again enjoyed the special treatment of being picked up by a car. It was like a leader going on an inspection trip. When they arrived at the place, they would hold a meeting. Then, they would bring local specialties and send them back the same way they came. By the way, come here tomorrow afternoon. Before he left, Ai Ching said to him, "There's a package for you." "What express delivery? East wind?" Huaishe glanced at the lady in the wheelchair, who had just used missiles to bombard the ground. He didn't dare to ask more questions. In short, it was as if the mission had been completed with a ding. Equipment +1, materials +3, experience +5. It seemed like there was also a foreshadowing of the main storyline. He still had many questions in his heart, but thankfully, he soon had a solution. Huaishe took out his phone and opened the contact list. Then, which lucky friend would get the chance to treat him to lunch and answer his questions? What the hell? Half an hour later, in the most popular Whole Sparrow banquet hall in Xian Hai, Yu Dongri spat out the tea that he had just poured into his mouth and coughed violently. "Returned pure people, what's wrong?" Huaishe was confused. Yu Dongri gasped for a long time before he recovered. He lowered his voice and asked, "Are you sure it's blessed people, returned pure people?" Huaishe had just nodded when he saw the old man bow to him and open his mouth to say something. He hurriedly pressed down old Lu's hand. "Don't be in such a hurry, old Tai. What the hell is the returned pure people?" "It's an illegal religious group. To put it simply, it's a cult." Yu Dongri's explanation was concise and to the point. Now he was wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. "Friend, how did you get yourself into such a big mess? They are a bunch of crazy people, but they are fighting cultists among cultists, super terrorists among terrorists. Just like that you know about it, right? Gui Jinghe, right?" Huaishe nodded with understanding. "I've seen it before. Gui your head." Yu Dongri was so angry that he slapped the back of his head again. "Can you be more serious, brother? If you don't handle this properly, not only will you be finished, the whole of Xian Hai might be gone. But even if you put it that way, I have no idea." Huaishe thought for a long time and asked, "Compared to Green Sun, who is more powerful?" Yu Dongri was stumped by this strange question for a long time. It was unclear what kind of thought he was forming or how to correct this thing's train of thought. They are not the same category. He stuttered for a long time but did not know how to explain it to Huaishe. He could only say, "Let's put it this way, Green Sun is a group of antisocial psychopaths, but their main purpose is to carry out a terrorist attack on the astronomy club, you understand, right?" Huaishe thought for a long time and slapped his knee. "You're talking about the heroes of Liangshan, right?" "About the same in terms of nature. Although the heroes of Liangshan and Green Sun are not good people, their main goal is to kill their way to Tokyo and take over the throne. Then the elder brother will be the emperor, the second brother will be the second emperor, and I will be the general or something. So, in the end, it's actually an internal struggle." Yu Dongri sighed and put down the teacup. "Let's talk about the pure people. This illegal organization is not only antisocial but also anti-human, but its nature is more complicated than Green Sunday." "Yes, continue." Huaishe nodded and silently jotted it down in a small notebook. "Their base is in hell outside the border, a place called the Land of Bliss. Even if the Astronomy Club can't get the coordinates, there's no way to wipe them out. Over the years, they've stirred up a lot of trouble. It's said that's how Manchester was destroyed. But in the end, their biggest threat is not themselves, but the thing behind them." Hearing the name Manchester, Huaishe was stunned for a moment. Soon, he was attracted by Yu Dongri's next words. "What they worship is one of the 24 elements of destruction, calculated by the Astronomy Club according to the prophecy of the former president. It's not an exaggeration to call it a god, the rancher. Element of destruction." Huaishe was stunned. "Why is it called the rancher when it sounds so awesome? Does he raise cows?" "Something like that," Yu Dongri said numbly. The reason why it's called the element of destruction is that in the assessment of the Astronomy Club, it has the probability, ability, or aptitude to destroy things in the present world. It's not something as gentle as a nuclear bomb, but a more twisted qualitative change and subversion. In short, it's the power to completely turn the present world into hell. You're right to call it the Demon King of Destruction. It's said that there are 23 others like him. Only a few have been announced. You may be used to seeing the remains of one of them. As he said that, he pointed to the sky outside the window. Huaisher curiously poked his head out and looked at the blue afternoon sky. The white clouds were mixed with the traces of fish. They came and went among the corals in the clouds and cast ripples on the ground. He was first at a loss, then confused, and then shocked. Wait, coral clouds? That's right. Yu Dongri took a sip of tea expressionlessly. To be precise, it should be called Old Gaia, which represents the old world that was destroyed. Those things are too far away for you. You know, the coral clouds floating in the sky are its corpses. Rancher, Kingdom of Heaven, Piper, Old Gaia, Gray-Robed Man, Golden Dawn. Among the 9 elements of destruction announced so far, Rancher is ranked first. According to the news secretly circulating, it even involves the secret of the collective fall of the old gods in 1650. The water behind it is unfathomable, enough to drown 100,000 of you. How about it, are you scared now? Huaisher was silent for a long time, then raised his hand. Excuse me, I seem to have heard. Kingdom of Heaven? Yu Dongri looked at him for a long time, confused. It's Kingdom of Heaven. It's the literal meaning of heaven, but I don't know the specific details. Why are you asking this? Nothing, just asking. Huaisher smiled awkwardly. He felt that he had heard this term somewhere before, but he couldn't put his finger on it. He could only scratch his head. You haven't told me why Rancher has such a weird name? Simply put, it's probably the food chain. Yu Dongri scratched his head, picked up the chopsticks, and drew a circle around everything that Huaisher saw. Finally, he stuck the chopsticks into the pot of dried sparrow meat that had just been served. He picked up a sparrow leg. You see, in the eyes of the purified people, this world is a huge food chain that runs through the present world, the border, and hell. Just like sheep eating grass and people eating sheep, if the clergymen see believers as sheep and call themselves shepherds, then at the top of this distorted hell food chain, the person who commands all the shepherds is Rancher, right? After the essence of the gods was distorted by hell, Rancher can be said to be an out-and-out evil god. The whole world is just a huge ranch for Rancher, and all living things are just his food. What the purified seek is to become one with their God in the final contraction and cycle of the food chain, becoming the incarnation of the ranch master. In fact, the so-called blessed land is just a plate for the ranch master, and the purified are merely tools for the ranch master to clean his utensils. Even the tools themselves are edible and environmentally friendly materials, just like this. He paused for a moment, stuffed the roasted sparrow leg into his mouth, and chewed loudly. Now, do you understand? Chapter 54. 10 minutes later, Huaisher finally realized what was going on. It seemed like he was being targeted by some dark force? Why? Huaisher slammed the table in grief and indignation. I only kicked him twice. Why is he acting like this? That's not all. I saw it clearly. Yu Dongri raised his finger to correct him. Not only did you break his little finger, you pulled his hair, you snatched his box, and you even kicked his crotch twice. If I were Wang Hai, I would definitely not let you go. How could you forget so quickly that you even hit him with a stick? Let me go. I'm just a prostitute. Yu Dongri blinked proudly. Look, I'm weak, helpless, and pitiful. And bald. Huaisher added. That's enough. My hair has already grown out. Yu Dongri was so angry that he took off his wig. He leaned over and pointed at his tragic hairline. Do you see it? Do you see it? It's already grown out. It's okay. It grows fast and it falls fast. Huaisher didn't even bother to look at him. He lowered his head and ate. Needless to say, the pigeon was quite delicious. Since it was Yu Dongri's treat, he didn't hold back and ordered another pigeon to make soup. As if sensing Huaisher's low mood, Yu Dongri put out his cigarette and pushed the dishes next to Huaisher. There's no need to be afraid. It's just a few small fries. You don't have to face the rancher head-on. Don't underestimate the Astronomy Association, kid. Your backer is one of the strongest in the world. Even if the rancher comes to the Earth, he'll be beaten back to his paradise. If you really go up, you'll only be dealing with a few small fries. He suggested, if you think you can't do it, you might as well resign. Huaisher paused for a moment, then lowered his head and continued to gnaw on the pigeon leg until the bones were clean and thrown into the plate. He pulled a piece of tissue to wipe his hand. No, actually, I'm not afraid, he said. It's just that I'm a little angry. No matter how powerful the rancher is, I don't have to worry about him, right? Huaisher raised his head and said seriously, but why is it so difficult just to live a good life? Yu Dongri was dumbfounded. He was silent for a long time before he shook his head and sighed. Because life is never simple, Huaisher, he said. Sometimes ascenders seem to have more choices than ordinary people, but sometimes everyone has no choice. Something will happen that you don't expect. It will hurt and upset you, but you have to try to accept it. Whether you want it or not, this is your life. When you become an ascender, maybe you'll have already bid farewell to your past life, Huaisher. It's just that you're still stuck in the past. He looked at the teenager with a complicated expression. If you just want to live a peaceful life, it's actually very simple. Even I can help you do it. Change your name and identity. You can withdraw and start over in another city. Huaisher shook his head without hesitation. My home is here. I'm not going anywhere. Your home is just an empty house. That's also my home. The teenager calmly replied, with it, no matter how miserable I am outside, I can at least be a domestic dog. If I didn't have it, then I would have to be a stray dog. Yu Dongri was silent. He didn't say anything else and just patted him on the shoulder. After the meal, Yu Dongri dawdled in the toilet for a long time. He didn't know how much hair growth cream he had applied before he came out. After paying the bill, he asked Huaisher where he was going. He asked if he could give him a ride. You bought a car again? Huaisher was shocked. I rented it. Yu Dongri opened the door and sat in the driver's seat. He started the engine and drove the car on the road. He looked at the road outside and suddenly said, I'm leaving. Didn't I tell you earlier? I plan to go out and play for 2 years. I finally packed up these 2 days. He pressed down the window and lit a cigarette. I'm leaving from Jinling on the early morning flight. Where are you going? America first. It's said that there are a lot of places to play in the free cities of the United States. Yu Dongri talked about his long travel plans. Next, I'll probably go to Rome or Egypt. I'll come back after spending all my money. Oh. Huaisher scratched his head. Have a safe trip. Yu Dongri shook his head and smiled. He didn't answer. He just reached out and picked up a paper bag and threw it to Huaisher. This is for you. Huaisher took the paper bag and opened it. Inside was a flat square box. When he took it out, he saw the logo on it and suddenly couldn't believe it. Where did you get this? A friend from Rome gave it to me. I forgot it in the box and didn't open it. I found it when I was packing. But now everyone uses mobile phones to listen to music. I don't know what to do with it. Yu Dongri said, If you like it, take it. Then I'll take it. Huaisher raised his eyebrows happily. He opened the plastic seal and the Cowan logo on the box, revealing the palm-sized music player inside, the brass body and the manual adjustment of the upper side of the double control knobs. He couldn't put it down. It was even more pleasant than getting the border relic. In this era where everyone was beginning to get used to mobile phones, very few people would think of this kind of thing called MP3. It was like being abandoned by the era with the CD player. Except for a few enthusiasts, very few people would pay attention to this kind of thing from the past. And the price of the remaining ones was getting higher and higher. Just this one player was already comparable to a good handmade piano. If it was a gift of the same value, Huai Shi might not accept it, but Yu Dongri's choice left him no room for hesitation. Besides, he broke a car worth millions. If he accepted a player worth more than 10,000, the burden on his conscience was negligible. It was a return gift for bawang shampoo. Looking back at the smiling teenager in the passenger seat, Yu Dongri had no idea what was going on in this guy's mind. He could only shake his head and sigh. It's good to be young. Finally, the car stopped in front of the Stone Marrow Museum. Huai Shi got out of the car, installed the player with satisfaction, and waved goodbye. Have a safe trip. I'll treat you to dinner when you come back. We'll see. Yu Dongri smiled and waved goodbye. Take care of yourself. The car left. Huai Shi watched old Lu's shadow disappear. His heart suddenly felt empty. He stood in place for a long time and shook his head to dispel the sadness. I can't worry anymore. I'll be gay if I worry anymore. I can only wish old Lu a safe trip. In fact, as soon as he got home, he began to worry again. The crow landed on the table in front of him. She wore a mask as a white coat, a miniature stethoscope around her neck, and a tube of dark green medicine wrapped around her wings. Come on, body check. She took out a pair of glasses from somewhere and put them on her beak. Her voice was gentle and charming. Let me see if you're developing normally. If it wasn't a crow, then it would be fine. Is there a problem with my graphics card? Huai Shi sighed, leaned back on the chair, and let her do as she wished. In fact, it was no different from a simple physical examination in the hospital. It had almost become a daily routine. His weight and height were measured, and his blood was poured into some strange reagent for testing. With Huai Shi's alchemy knowledge that was close to nothing, he couldn't see anything at all. He didn't need to see anything. For his own body, he had a more intuitive feeling than any other test. His development had begun to accelerate. If the original process was slowly accelerating, now he was running on the highway and began to rampage, growing wildly. Every day, he could clearly feel his body strengthening. The itchiness and pain of his bones growing had already woken him up from his dreams several times. After 2 days of muscle growth soreness passed, he began to feel his heart beating erratically from time to time. He always felt the phantom pain from his internal organs and limbs. In less than a week, he had grown 4 centimeters taller. The size of his clothes before was almost obsolete, and now, his thin arms and legs could actually be seen with the outline of his muscles. Especially his hands, his nails grew faster and faster. He now cut his nails once a day on average. Every time his nails were cut, he could smell the hallucinatory smell of sulfur. According to Crow, this was a side effect of specialization. Because his direction of improvement seemed to be perception type, even if the growth was over, his muscle strength wouldn't increase to an exaggerated degree. As compensation, some of his joints, tendons, and bones would be strengthened. His nerve reaction speed and internal organs would be further improved. Most importantly, his eyes, ears, smell, and touch would be strengthened. According to Crow's evaluation, this type of perceptive type was the most suitable type for survival. Could see far, smell a lot, hear a lot, and have explosive power. Could also run very fast. It was like an old dog, slippery and slippery. If one did not use special tools, it would be impossible to catch it. Coupled with the premonition of death, that she kept dying and dying, Huai Shi felt that she would be able to survive until the end of time. But there was a flaw. For some reason, his face was getting paler and paler recently. He looked more and more like a pretty boy, the kind that was powdered. His originally tanned arms were now as white as jade. Even the blood vessels under his skin had become clear. This made Huaishur, who longed for a tough guy's style, feel very uncomfortable. Isn't this too sissy? He looked at himself in the mirror. Can't I be more normal? It looks like the effect of the medicine is good. Crow seemed to be quite satisfied with his result. He took off his glasses. If it continues like this, you can be buried in about a week. What the hell? Huaishur was alert. Did I accidentally say something? Crow blinked innocently. I seem to have heard someone say buried in the ground. You're probably hallucinating, aren't you? Crow looked away and sighed helplessly. This is a common symptom of puberty. Like puberty, there are always some shameful things happening. You have to get used to it. Chapter 55. In the quiet study, Ai Ching stared silently at the phone on the table. The light rising from the screen intertwined into an invisible screen in the air, revealing a man with a dull expression sitting at his desk. She said, "I want to check the progress of the report I submitted." After a moment of silence, the dull clerk looked away from the computer screen and replied, "Your reinforcement application has been approved. In accordance with the sublimator management law of the host country, the application has been conveyed to the East Asia Social Security Bureau and will be approved within 1 working day. It is the duty of every inspector to eradicate threat. Please continue to pay attention to the current situation and ensure that the situation does not deteriorate before the matter is resolved." Convey Ai Ching sighed. In recent years, as the pressure outside the border gradually weakened, the United Nations began to further restrict the rights of the Astronomical Society. Now, in a country with strong sovereignty, a frontline inspector like her was no longer qualified to retain a military department. The staffing structure was getting smaller and smaller, gradually evolving from the original action agency to an observation agency. In the face of the increasingly powerful Big Five, the Directorate of Command chose to give in and hand over the daily military operations to the host country to avoid disputes over sovereignty. No, it should be said that the struggle between the sovereignty faction and the border faction within the Directorate of Command had reached a climax. As the representatives of the Big Five began to demand more rights and resources, contradictions inevitably arose. If this continues, sooner or later, I will have to work in the Special Affairs Department, right? But to still maintain such a conservative attitude towards this kind of matter involving the elements of destruction, it could be said to be indulgent, right? Or do they want to let the situation deteriorate and come out to clean up the situation in the end? There were too many possibilities, and it was difficult to guess. She rubbed her eyebrows and stopped thinking about this damned question. She asked, "What about the other application?" After the clerk operated the computer, he looked up and replied, "The relic application you submitted has been approved." As he spoke, he pulled out a form from the vacuum pipe next to him and checked the contents and reply on it. The border relic applied for is number 1752, the erosive object with a threat level of S. Faust. He looked up and said, "You will be allowed to question it 3 times. Please follow the relevant regulations and read the 6th, 7th, and 19th articles. Complete, please confirm." A text appeared on Ai Ching's phone. As usual, she took a look and said, "It's over." The clerk nodded and tapped a few times in the air, pulling out a text box out of thin air. He turned to Ai Ching and said, "Please read the following words and promise to abide by them." Ai Ching calmly read the words on it. "I promise to remain vigilant and suspicious of everything said by Border Relic Faust. I promise to keep the questioning of Faust within the scope of the incident. I will promise to observe the precept. I will maintain my rationality and give up my personal freedom when necessary. I will accept the control and personality correction of the technical department. That's all." The moment she finished reading, her signature appeared on the text box. Then, it turned into a piece of A4 paper and fell into the hands of the clerk. 3 questions. Please use them with caution. The clerk picked up the seal on the side and stamped it. Puff. The crisp sound of the red stamp landing on the paper was like popping a bubble, reverberating throughout the room. That formless sound seemed to sweep through space, causing everything to ripple like water. The authorization was approved and the world unfolded. In a flash, Ai Qing felt a sense of weightlessness as if she was on a slide or in a sports car. But then, the strange feeling came to an abrupt end. The screen projected by the phone had dissipated. In the quiet room, a phantom appeared silently and slowly condensed into a substance. Bordered delivery. BTHFPREOTST. If the abbreviation were to be translated, it could be called Rainbow Bridge. It was one of the 3 major blockades that wrapped around the world. It was also one of the 3 safety valves established by the Astronomy Society to prevent the world from being destroyed. One of its most direct functions was to rely on the hundreds of thousands of channels and countless transit stations built above the world to place anyone in any corner of the world at any time. Although many restrictions were formulated to prevent abuse, it was inevitable that it would become the most commonly used method of movement in emergencies. The sound of steel clanging sounded. It came from the armor. It was a man whose age could not be determined. His face was covered with a beard, and he wore heavy armor. He held a flame-shaped greatsword in his hand, and his braided hair was engraved with layers of tattoos. It was bleak and majestic, but his face was palpitating. Not only were his eyes sewn together by needle and thread and his ears that were filled with molten iron, but even his open lips had no trace of a tongue. He didn't look, didn't listen, didn't speak. This was the caretaker of the border relic, Faust. At the same time, he was also the safety bolt that cut off the user's head when the relic went out of control or violated the rules. He held a greatsword in one hand and a huge and heavy book in the other. The steel cover and lock looked like layers of restraint. With the release of countless iron chains, the lock opened. Amidst the sound of viscous liquid boiling, countless words flew out from it, bumping around aimlessly in the air like flies. In the end, they gathered together and formed a stooped old man. As soon as he landed, he coughed violently. His lungs were like an outdated engine, spewing out sparks, black smoke, and wisps of pitch-black liquid. Before those things landed, they were pulled back into the book by an invisible force. Phew! The old man in a Roman robe slowly straightened his back, propped himself up with his walking stick, and sighed softly. I'm finally a little more comfortable. It's hard to come by freedom. Who summoned me? He looked around, his strange, gloomy eyes sweeping around. Finally, his gaze fell on Ai Qing's body, revealing a mocking smile. Ah, an interesting half-finished product, a broken soul. Look, what did I say last time? Little slut, we meet again. As he spoke, he leaned forward and almost impudently sniffed the scent on Ai Qing's hair. The fragrance of a virgin. What a pity. You've clearly matured? In the end, no one plucked you? He paused and chuckled strangely. Or is it that no one cares about you? In life, if you can't appreciate the beauty between the sexes, isn't it too desolate? Do you need me to help you? Bang! The sound of a stun gun flashed. The old man convulsed and fell to the ground. He knelt in front of the wheelchair and convulsed violently. After a long time, he raised his head stiffly, not knowing if it was because of pleasure or pain. Oh. This feeling, is it declaring to me the right to be a master? To a book? Ha, how pitiful! As he spoke, Faust grinned and revealed a mocking smile. He spread his hands. Devil Faust, I answer your summons. Please ask my master if you can bear the price necessary to reach omniscience. In that instant, the armored man behind him clenched the hilt of his sword. Commandment 1. No question will receive a direct answer, but there is still a price to pay. Commandment 4. Do not ask Faust for anything. Commandment 9. Do not ask Faust questions that involve too much, and do not seek answers directly. The only appropriate method is to verify indirectly to reduce the price. Ai Ching closed her eyes, ignoring the devil's impudent laughter, and began to think. After a long time, she opened her eyes and asked, "Is the Savior Society's current actions of their own volition?" Faust laughed strangely, stretched out his hand, and opened his palm. "The price for this question is an Austin gold coin, the one you carry with you." Ai Ching frowned and looked at the armored man. The armored man didn't have any reaction, nor did he object. According to the question, Faust would ask for things around the questioner, not limited to himself and his possessions. Most of the time, the price would fluctuate according to the difficulty of the answer, but there were always exceptions. Faust would always ask for things that were of great significance to them, such as the lives of their family members, the sacrifice of their children, and so on. The serious consequences caused by this were countless. Otherwise, the astronomer wouldn't have let the armored man guard this book. After the price exceeded the limit, he would directly cut off the head of the questioner to prevent Faust from giving the answer and concluding the deal. One Odysseus gold coin was still within the range. Ai Ching was silent for a moment, took off the gold coin on the silver chain from her neck, handed it over, and didn't say anything else. Faust laughed proudly, held the gold coin, and greedily licked it, as if he craved the sweat and body odor on it. He swallowed it into his stomach. Then, he wiped his mouth in satisfaction and answered her question. "Just like how birds can't stop the storm." In other words, after Wang Hai, there was still someone controlling all of this and brewing a plan? Ai Ching frowned. The item that was extremely precious to her was only exchanged for such a sentence. Even if she was prepared, she still felt very unhappy. She was silent for a long time, let out a long breath, and suppressed her anger. She raised the second question again. "Will their plan lead to changes in the Deep Hell Magic City?" "Ah, interesting question." Faust smiled and looked around. "Let me think about it. What is the price of this question? What should I take away? No, what should I leave behind to make you feel unforgettable pain?" Soon, his gaze fell on the wall. It was a picture frame covered by a dustproof cloth. He turned around and looked at Ai Ching's livid face. He smiled in satisfaction. "I want it." The sword-bearer didn't react. Ai Ching was silent, her hands gripping the armrest tightly. Under Bai Shi's skin, the blood vessels were pulsing angrily. After a long time, she closed her eyes. "Take it." Faust laughed heartily and snapped his fingers. The picture frame began to burn, and the dust-proof cloth fell to the ground. In the dancing flames, the silhouette of a woman holding a child could be vaguely seen. It was as if she was holding the world's treasure. She smiled brightly at the camera. Her smile disappeared in the flames. "Answer me," Ai Ching said softly. "Answer my question, Faust." Chapter 56. As You Wish. Faust danced with joy and excitement, enjoying the sweet pain and anger. He opened his mouth and loudly sang the words of a poem, a ritual, 10 times of gluttony, the bones of 100 people, the eyes of 1,000 birds, and 10,000 venomous snakes. He died in a spiritual coffin, which was why he wept. He transformed in hell and thus perished. The shadow of rebirth attaches itself to the wings, and the dormant birds will fly into the sky. Crack! It was the sound of the armrest breaking under the angry clench. Ai Ching gritted her teeth and did not speak. His most precious treasure had only been exchanged for a useless prophecy poem? After the great poetic mood, Faust stroked his hair in a refreshed manner, raised his head, and looked down at the pair of eyes, as if he could see the raging lava under the ice. He grinned. "You have one last question left." Ai Ching did not speak. Faust waited calmly, until she finally calmed down and asked her last question. "Will someone lose their life because of this in the Astronomy Society?" Faust raised his eyebrows. He leaned forward with his crutches, leaned closer and carefully looked at Ai Ching's face, admiring her calm expression. He watched quietly until he saw the desire for an answer in her eyes. Only then did he reveal an evil smile. Do you want to know? He chuckled and stared at her with wide eyes. Do you want to know? Do you really, really want to know? Ai Ching did not speak. You should have a better question. What made you weak, little girl? Faust admired her face in amazement and said proudly, I know who you want to ask, so there's no need to beat around the bush. I can tell you the answer. But, he paused and said the price that was almost a joke. I want your tears. Can't do it. In the silence, Ai Ching looked at him coldly. I don't have that kind of thing. Then you are destined to not get an answer. Ha ha, ha 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 ha, ha 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 ha. Faust laughed heartily, as if the devil who had peeped into a person's heart was mocking his master. Why do you still care about people other than yourself, little girl? Don't you hate everything? You hate the ascended, you hate the powerless, you hate the strong, and you hate the weak. You hate those who have happiness, but those who have lost everything do not earn your pity. Is it really necessary for you to hate me? Forget it. He grinned maliciously, tearing open the last scar. Isn't the one you hate the most yourself? Ai Ching didn't say anything. It was as if he didn't hear anything. You will suffer for eternity, never to be free. Faust grinned, his forked tongue stirring the venomous saliva in his mouth. Nobody can save you, little girl. Your heart has long been left in hell, in a lonely place where even demons can't survive. You will suffer eternally, just as you will be forever alone. If it's just loneliness and pain, is it something to be afraid of? Ai Ching finally raised her eyes and said softly, Since you are happy enough, it's my turn next. At that moment, Faust's eyes widened. He bent down. He stared at his abdomen in astonishment, at the dagger that had gone into the hilt. The dagger was pulled out. A bright holy light emerged from the spine of the dagger, evaporating the drops of black blood with a sizzling sound. This was the farewell gift she had prepared with great care. Bang! His body shook and collapsed again, little by little turning into an ink-stained mosquito, and was pulled back into the violently flipping book. Go back to your hell, Faust. Ai Ching looked at him indifferently. Enjoy the eternal life and omniscience that even your slaves would pity. No, I will look forward to, in pain, the demon cast a mocking glance at the mortal world. The next time you and I meet, the price you will pay, the figure disappeared. The armored man's hand that held the sword clenched and relaxed. In the end, he did not do anything. Although she was suspected of damaging relics at the border, Ai Ching did not break any rules. Therefore, the pages of the book closed and the shackles came again. His sealed eyes seemed to look at Ai Ching. After a long time, he retracted his gaze, turned into a phantom, and left. In the silence, the study returned to silence. After a long time, suddenly a phone rang. The caller ID showed unknown. The phone rang persistently, as if waiting for her response until she reached out and pressed the answer button. Who is this? Xiao Qing? It's me, Chi-Wen. Do you still remember Third Uncle Chi? Warm laughter came from the phone, and a slightly old voice said, Sorry, I suddenly called. Did I disturb you? When I heard from the old master that you were in Xian High, I was shocked. Why didn't you come to my place after such a long time? The old man on the phone sighed. Coincidentally, your cousin just came back from America. You young people must have a lot in common. You should interact more. How about I ask him to pick you up tomorrow, and you can come to my place for a meal? Ai Ching listened silently. She suppressed the unhappiness and gloominess in her heart. She had enough of this old man who took advantage of his seniority. Mr. Chi, there is no need for a meal. I have been busy with work recently. We are family. There is no need to be so distant. Are you still angry at your family? Blood is thicker than water. There is no hatred that cannot be resolved. Third Uncle Chi sighed with melancholy. If you are really angry, I will apologize to you, okay? The old master will be celebrating his 100th birthday in a few months. Don't be angry with him anymore. Every time there is a festival, the old master will ask if Xiaoqing is back. Is Xiaoqing back? He calls you, but you always don't pick up. No matter how important work is it more important than family? Moreover, didn't the old master do it for your own good back then? Look, in the end, your father still succeeded in ascending. Even you are showing signs of awakening your source substance. Crack. A crack appeared on the pen in Ai Qing's hand. In the silence, Ai Qing lowered her eyes. She could no longer hide the gloominess and anger that seeped into her bones. She let the person on the other end of the phone chatter on for a long time until he shut up. Mr. Qi, let's end the boring conversation here. I still have work to do, so let's end it here. She said, finally, please remember that my name is Ai Qing. Ai as in mugwort leaves, Qing as in sky. Since you think that way, I have nothing else to say. In the silence, Qi did not say anything else. He only sighed. The old master often tells us something. Children who do not come home will suffer outside. The dial tone came. The phone was hung up. Ai Qing calmly put down the phone with an expressionless face. If good news was like a dove that never arrived, then bad news was like a crow that always came in groups and then kept leaving behind stinking feces, leaving behind a disgusting mess. They would erupt in one place. At the time you least expected, in the place you least expected. Now, not only was there a problem with the work of the returned people and the vicious fable left behind by Faust, but the pressure from her family was also blocking her at the most inappropriate time. Even though this pressure had long been within her expectations, she had long been aware of how precious she was as a puppet. Whether it was from her family's standpoint or her personal judgment, she would not allow herself to drift away from the Yin family. After declining for nearly 100 years, the current Yin family had finally recovered with great difficulty, but it was already far away from its original prominent position. If they wanted to recover their former glory, who knew how long it would take? Compared to the long-established aristocrats abroad, a few decades could be said to be short. There were many examples of them returning to the peak of power after enduring humiliation for more than 100 years. Of course, there were even more corpses that did not survive. This was a long gamble where everything was at stake. Every bargaining chip was crucial. In other words, in order to achieve this goal, every clansman, whether it was the main branch or the side branch, was an incomparably precious consumable. Moreover, Ai Qing had already become the inspector of the Astronomical Society. Even if she was just a newcomer, the hidden power behind her could reach an astonishing level when necessary. It could be foreseen that the Yin family was already prepared to participate in this struggle between the main party representing the five mainstays and the border party representing the border. Perhaps they had already made a bet. And what role would she play in their plan? Forcing her tired brain to operate, Ai Qing actually began to envy the fat professor in the long silence. At least when he needed it, he could find a large amount of heat anytime and anywhere. Unlike her, she could only add sweet sugar cubes to her coffee time and time again. What made her wary was not the family, at least not yet. But this phone call, what did it mean? A warning? A warm notice to save her family? Or something else? It should not be just that. Unreasonably, she had a premonition that Qi did not only represent the Yin family. Even if the Yin family had given him a lot of support over the years, if one thought about it with their feet, how could Qi, that old ghost who held a lot of potential power in his hands, be so obedient as to flatter the Yin family over such a matter? Was his goal really that simple? No matter how sincere his words were, she still felt a hint of something else from Qi, as if he was hiding something. Even those seemingly sincere persuasions seemed to be probing for something. Even if she had never had any contact with them, she knew how much power the Qi family had in this gradually declining small city. It was almost like the Huai family back then. On the surface, the Qi family had been focused on shipping and logistics all these years, but in the dark, there was probably a lot of smuggling. But was this kind of thing rare? It could be said that it was commonplace. It was like living off the mountain and drinking water. With so many coastal routes, if they did not smuggle, would they still be human? This kind of thing could not be stopped. With Qi Wen's shrewdness, he would definitely not go personally and leave any evidence behind. So, what exactly was he testing? What did he want from her? A censor who was almost like a decoration. She pondered silently. After a long time, she let out a long breath. It seemed that no matter what, she had to investigate all the hidden dangers at once. In addition, the necessary precautions had to be put on the agenda. After pondering for a while, she picked up the phone. Hello, City Library Archives Management Room. Who is this? Professor? Ai Ching asked. Other than the investigation of the Savior Society, help me find out all the movements of the Qi family in the past few years. Hurry up. There was the sound of writing on the other end of the phone. Soon, a low voice answered, Okay, I've already recorded it. The price is still the same as before. For urgent orders, it will be 30% higher. Is that okay? Up to you. I only want result. One day. The professor answered. Then, the phone call ended. Ai Ching put down the phone expressionlessly, but the uneasiness in her heart grew stronger. After a long time, she closed her eyes and sighed tiredly. Chapter 57. In the quaint office, Qi Wen hung up the phone. He didn't sound as decrepit as he had sounded on the phone. He just seemed a little old. His mottled white hair was combed neatly, and his suit was well ironed. His eyebrows were strong, and he looked dignified. At this moment, he didn't show any displeasure. He just rubbed the space between his eyebrows with a slightly complicated expression. Behind the desk, the young man eating oranges looked up casually and asked, Dad, what did she say? Qi Wen's expression was calm. She's still young and doesn't know much. She'll know how good the family is in the future. Then she doesn't know how to appreciate kindness? The young man sneered. The father is a good-for-nothing, and the daughter is a cripple. Did she really think that she could become a supervisor on her own? If you ask me, Dad, you don't have to waste your feelings on a good-for-nothing who will marry into the family sooner or later. TSK, if it wasn't for Old Master's intentions, I wouldn't want such a defective product for free. Bang! Qi Wen's teacup shattered in front of him. Hot water splashed everywhere, almost scaring him. Shut up, good-for-nothing. What's going on in your head? You can't figure out Old Master's intentions. Qi Wen's eyes widened as he glared at him. You can't meddle in the Savior Society's affairs. You actually hooked up with that group of lunatics and even left behind that scourge. Are you afraid that I won't die of anger early enough, Qi Yuan? Qi Yuan was stunned for a long time, then said stubbornly, Aren't I just trying to help the family? Shut up. Heluo? Heluo, come in. Qi Yuan suddenly slammed the walking stick in his hand, and a strong man walked in from outside the door. Send this wastrel home, Qi Yuan said coldly. Qi Yuan said coldly, Before the news blows over, break whichever leg he dares to step out of the door. Dad, aren't you going overboard? Qi Yuan was indignant. Why does it seem like I poked a hole in the sky just to earn some money? Weren't you the one who hooked up with them first? What are you afraid of, Dad? That B***TCH will pour tea for you sooner or later. Does she dare to offend us? Qi Yuan was so angry that he didn't want to talk to him anymore. He closed his eyes. Soon, Qi Yuan was dragged away by his bodyguards, leaving Heluo alone in the office. His expression was still calm, and he did not speak. After a long time, Qi Yuan rubbed the space between his brows and finally heaved a sigh of relief, and he recovered his calm and deep appearance from before. Is it about the Savior Society? He asked. Wang Hai has been hiding in the suburbs for the past 2 days. He seems to be contacting someone. Luo said. Young master was deceived by him, and it seems like he even offered a reward. Although I've cleaned up the traces, I'm afraid the trouble caused by the Savior Society will implicate us. Where is he now? I don't know. This afternoon, he told me that he wanted to see you. Luo paused for a moment and repeated Wang Hai's words. He said that he had the will of the baptized. As instructed, I told him that the boss was recuperating and would not see anyone. Then he left. Chi-Wen lowered his dark eyes. Very good, he said. Very good. In the silence, Chi-Wen's fingers tapped on the walking stick, and he seemed to be talking to himself. Over the past few decades, why is there always so much trouble in a place as poor as Exhilarating? After so many years of waiting, the Huai family fell, and then the Yin family came. Finally, the Yin family left, and the Savior Society started to hide in the dark again. He narrowed his eyes and mumbled softly, one after another, they want others to be their pawns. Luo did not speak. Chi-Wen did not need an answer. It was as if he was calculating some difficult choice. His expression kept changing, sometimes dark, sometimes ferocious, until Luo took a step forward and interrupted his thoughts. Ignoring his angry gaze, Luo said in a low voice, "Boss, it's time to make a decision." Chi-Wen looked coldly at this assistant who had followed him for many years. After a long, long time, as if he had finally made up his mind about something, he closed his eyes. What about that cowherd who was asking around? He was taken care of yesterday. His body sank into the sea, Luo replied. My subordinates asked him clearly. This was his personal operation and had nothing to do with the Astronomy Society. Chi-Wen's expression calmed down slightly. Does Yin Qing know what happened back then? That matter was dealt with very cleanly. There was no trace left behind, Luo replied. After the matter, I found someone to place a soulless seal on everyone involved. Even if they don't die early, they will become idiots and won't remember anything. Even if she knows, she won't have any evidence. In the silence, it was impossible to even hear the sound of breathing. After a long time, Chi-Wen looked up. Then let's end it. His expression was cold. Cooperating with them back then was a mistake. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been in so much trouble today. Tomorrow, no, tonight, you will go and clean up all traces of the Savior Society. Don't leave anything behind that can be used against you. Even though the Qi family is small, not just any crazy person can come and mess with us. Okay. Luo nodded. What about Yin Qing? We don't need to do anything. Chi-Wen narrowed his eyes. The most important thing now is to pull us out of this mess and leave. Exhilarating is about to change. I want to see how long she can jump on this fire pit. In the evening, Huai Shi received a delivery. To be exact, it was a car without a tag that stopped in front of the Stone Marrow Museum. After calling Huai Shi to come out, it left a box behind and left. Yesterday's delivery style was like this. This is the proof of the Silent One. It looks like an ore, but it is actually a polymer of origin substances. Only after a person abides by an oath and a trust to guard a secret for a lifetime will it have a chance of appearing after death. It can be said to be the crystallization of will and loyalty. For it to be the size of a thumb, it seems that the secret is indeed extraordinary. As for the ores, they are very common. Some of the shadow iron and frost silver from the border are the cheapest. These are all essential materials to help you create the stigmata. Crow explained, then finally looked at the sacrificial knife that Huai Shi had placed on the table. However, the main material is this thing. The sacrificial knife let out a trembling cry as if it was afraid. It constantly tried to jump out of its sheath and escape, but when she stepped on it with her claws, it stopped moving. It only cried out miserably, as if begging for her mercy. It was clearly the awe-inspiring blood-drinker demon knife, but now it looked like a lab rat waiting to be slaughtered. Crow suddenly asked, Why sure, do you still remember what the stigmata is? Yes, I remember you said. A solidified miracle? Yes, that's right. The so-called stigmata is the name given to an invisible miracle after it has been given a physical body. Crow shrugged slightly. Although these miracles often bring disaster, but people who expect miracles from hell to bring happiness must be crazy, right? The reason why relics from the border are special is not only because of their function and because they are in hell, but also because they are the products of the abyss miracles. It is not an exaggeration to call them another type of stigmata. Hearing this, Huaisher finally understood. He could not help but roll his eyes. So, you are going to dismantle a car, take out the engine, and make me a little sheep, right? Something like that. Tear down Peter to pay Paul. Crow flapped its wings confidently. Don't worry, there is not much that needs to be used. I will gather the rest of the things, and this knife can probably still be used, right? Huaisher was too lazy to say anything more. He could only pray that the stigmata would not be too much of a scam. He did not ask for much, as long as she did not take out the basic functions and sell them as downloadable content. It was okay to pre-sell it every few days, but if there was a gold collector's edition, who could stand it? By the way, what is that? Huaisher pointed to the water basin in the corner where a strange map appeared. He could vaguely tell that it was the terrain of Xian Hai. In a remote place, a spot of light flickered silently. Oh, that. Crow glanced at it and said meaningfully, that is where Wang Hai is hiding now. Chapter 58. At first, he was at a loss, then stunned, and then shocked. What the hell? Huaisher jumped up in fright and leaned over to look at the bird's eye view in the basin, distinguishing the appearance of a decadent factory in the suburbs. Unbelievable. Wang Hai is here? Yes. Crow asked. It's just a watermarking method that marks and traces through the branching ink. Is there anything incredible about it? Huaisher's eyes widened. Why didn't you say so earlier? But you didn't ask. Crow looked at him with a puzzled expression, full of innocence. Huaisher couldn't help but want to pick up this damn bird and crush it to death. You're clearly a traitor. He slammed the table angrily. Look at you, you eat my rice, live in my house, steal my electricity, and use my network. I won't argue with you about this, but you clearly know that this grandson wants to kill me. Why did you hide it from me? Oh. Crow looked at him curiously. If I told you earlier, what would you do? Nonsense, of course I would call someone to deal with him. The Astronomy Society? Or the Special Affairs Division? Or both? Crow laughed strangely. But, how do you want to explain that they are hiding in that place? Huaisher opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted. No, I'm not talking about the method you used to find his hiding place. Crow paused and glanced at the reflection in the water. But, how do you explain why the property that once belonged to your family became the nest of the purified people? What the hell? Huaisher's eyes widened and looked at the basin in astonishment. You said this place, this thing, belongs to my family? You've really forgotten all about it. Crow looked at him with pity. Why do I, an outsider, know more than you? No, it should be said that this is something that can be understood by a little investigation of the property right. Yes, she said, the place where Wang Hai is currently hiding is one of the Hui clan's cargo transfer warehouses. In other words, the place that belonged to your family more than 10 years ago has now become a fasting circle for the pure people to raise border mutants. Following his words, countless old papers flew through the air and landed in front of Huaisher, forming a neat stack. I can understand your confusion and bewilderment, but this is indeed the conclusion drawn from the old files in your home. Huaisher silently flipped through the papers, page by page. These were indeed the things that had been piled up in his family's storeroom. They were dusty, covered in mold, and discarded in some inconspicuous corner. Forgotten by everyone. Crow was right. That place used to be one of the Huai clan's businesses. It was a warehouse used to transfer goods. But I don't remember. Huai Shi sat on the chair blankly and carefully tried to recall. However, there were too many gaps in his childhood memories and too many vague things. After that high fever, a lot of things were fading away, but this didn't seem to be something to be surprised about. Ever since he could remember, his family's businesses seemed to have begun to decline rapidly. Even if his great-grandfather's generation was astonishingly wealthy, all that was left was an old house. The Huai clan used to have so many businesses. Even if something happened occasionally, it wouldn't be strange, right? It was just that they were unlucky. It was just like how he had always been. But why did he feel so angry? Motherf asterisk cur. He cursed softly, but he didn't know what to be angry about. In the silence, Crow stood on the hilt of her knife and looked at him with pity. The flickering lights elongated her shadow, which fell on the wall and danced like flames. "Let me give you a second lesson, Huai Shi." Her voice changed. It wasn't frivolous and playful like before. Instead, it became solemn, like the collision of ice and iron, with a low hum. Fate cannot be controlled, but its target is different. Fate! Yes, fate. The blackbird said, some people choose their fate, and some people are deterred by the difficulties and fear they see, and stop moving forward. They can only wait to be chosen by fate. Although the latter is not bad, when duckweed in the sea is swept into the storm, how can it be qualified to blame its own luck? Huai Shi was silent for a long time and asked, will the former definitely lead to happiness? Who knows? Crow calmly replied, fighting with all your might may not change anything, but at least you can die with dignity, right? Huai Shi was silent. You don't have to hate yourself. After all, you didn't have a choice before, but now everything is different. Crow said, if you don't care about the past, you can turn a blind eye and let everything continue to sink in the darkness. I promise you, you will have a bright future. But if you really want to know what happened to you, no, to your family, you have to face it yourself. After a long silence, Huai Shi couldn't help but want to laugh. Even if I know, what can it change? Nothing could be changed. Nothing would come back. Just like fate can't change. Just like the Book of Fate. The dust had already settled, and the things recorded in it would never change. Crow looked into his eyes and told him word by word, but at least you can know why you lost it, right? In the dead silence, Huai Shi closed his eyes and sighed tiredly. After a long, long time, he opened his eyes, got up, picked up his coat from the chair, put it on and checked the trigger, body, and magazine of the pistol issued by the Astronomy Association, and stuffed the pistol into the concealed holster at his waist. Finally, he picked up the sacrificial knife on the table and hung it on the buckle of his belt. Let me use it first. Huai Shi zipped up the jacket. I'll be back soon. Okay. Crow flapped his wings. Have a safe trip. Just as she was about to leave, Huai Shi's footsteps paused as she saw the envelope on the table. What's that? That. Crow glanced at it. Someone came by at noon, but didn't come in. They only left this in the mailbox outside. I think it should be for you. Huai Shi picked up the envelope and shook it. It seemed to contain some kind of iron plate. It was quite heavy. After opening the envelope, a key was drawn out and fell into Huai Shi's palm. It was a brass key. It was quite old. It didn't look like a precious item to open a security door or a safe. It was just the type of cheap lock that could be found everywhere. The faint weight was so familiar. Huai Shi almost remembered the position of every tooth on it. It was the key to his piano room. Fooey? She was probably the only person who would send this key over. After all, abusing the power of the student council to check a student's home address was quite her style. What did it mean? Huai Shi looked at the key and suddenly felt like laughing. Skipping class again, that guy. He thought about it and hung it back on the keyring in his pocket. There had never been a moment when he was so sure that this abrupt vacation would end. His life would start again. Once again, he would return to the room that belonged to him. Once again, he would begin to practice piano, slack off, and imagine the happy times in the future. He would return to his own ward club. Thank you. He sent a WeChat message to Fu Yi. Not long after, she sent him an emoticon. It was a picture of Huai Shi standing in front of the brothel, hesitating. There were even 2 colorful words photoshopped on it. Good luck. So, the leader who sent me the emoji was you? He didn't know whether to be angry or laugh. He turned off the phone screen and opened the door. Huai Shi, it was time to go. Chapter 59. In the darkness, there was only silence. Only the sound of chewing could be heard. The faint light illuminated the figure sitting on the chair. He seemed to be in deep thought. His eyes were lowered as he listened to the sound in the distance. After a long time, he sighed. The Qi family betrayed us, he whispered, but it doesn't matter. A fence-sitter like the Qi family is not trustworthy. Betrayal is expected. Compared to such an unworthy ally, an incompetent subordinate is more of a headache. The sound of chewing stopped abruptly. The darkness was like a big mouth that slowly opened and spat out a naked and thin body. He coughed violently on the ground and wailed miserably. After a long time, he finally woke up from his nightmare. He crawled on the ground like a dog and pounced in front of the figure, kowtowing with all his might. God have mercy, God have mercy, God have mercy, he cried and begged. I was too arrogant, it's me, it's all me, give me another chance. In the silence, no one spoke. God seemed to be in deep thought. After a long time, he slowly shook his head. No, Wang Hai, he said, if the hunting dog's harvest was due to the hunter's instructions, then the failure of the hunting dogs should also be attributed to the negligence of their superiors. This is my mistake. I underestimated your arrogance. After all, you know nothing about the real world. Wang Hai froze on the spot, as if he could not stand the chill in the darkness. He trembled violently and only whimpered from his throat. Please have mercy on me. Please have mercy on me. Please give me one more chance. I will. I will not fail again. No, you didn't fail. God slowly shook his head and said calmly, in fact, you successfully attracted the attention of the Astronomical Association and the Special Affairs Department. Even if you did not stir up a storm, you have already achieved the minimum goal. The reason why you were punished was because of the contempt you had for the Xing God. He stretched out his hand and stroked Wang Hai's head. You were confused by the currency of mortals and have no respect for true power. You also did not give faith and loyalty to the true God. You can't be created. Wang Hai's body trembled as he felt the chill and terror coming from that hand. He found it hard to scream, and in the silence, tears flowed down his face. From its throat, Fen let out a whine with all its might. My lord, have mercy, have mercy. The Xing God has never been cruel. Wang Hai, even a believer must be compassionate. The Lord looked down at him. If you ask for my mercy, then I will give you mercy and power. After saying that, the shadow slowly got up from the chair, squatted down, and looked at the pleasantly surprised Wang Hai. He then took out a dagger and gently placed it in front of Wang Hai. Wang Hai's smile froze. Isn't what you've been trying so hard to seek revenge on the living corpses of the Astronomical Association? The Lord whispered in his ear, but now, it seems that using someone else to do it is not as good as doing it yourself, right? The Lord slowly got up and looked at him one last time. You still have a long time to make your choice before the destruction arrives. You can choose to die obediently, or you can choose to obey the gift of God. This is the Xing God's last generosity to you. He said, if you can attract some attention later, then jump around as much as you want. Anyway, grasshoppers after autumn are only useful for this. If you can get what you want before death, you will not let down the Xing God's kindness to you. He turned and left, disappearing into the darkness. In the dead silence, there was only Wang Hai lying on the ground, sweating profusely. The pitch-black dagger silently reflected a cold light. In the distance, Huai Shi saw a dark car drive out from behind the high wall and drive away. There seemed to be someone sitting in the car, but he could not see clearly because of the reflective sticker. He squatted in the shade and quietly looked at the quiet warehouse in the distance. He looked for a long time but could not see anything. After all, the transit warehouse took up a large area. From the outside, he could only see a high wall and warehouses. He could vaguely make out the staff dormitory, a 2-story office building, and various containers that were piled up messily and began to fade. In the suburbs, there were no high-rise buildings, so there was no way to see far. If he really wanted to see something, he would have to go in. Stealing a chicken was not an option. After realizing this, Huai Shi sighed. He took out a spray from his pocket that Crow gave him and sprayed a layer of it on his body. The mutant's sense of smell was usually far superior to that of canines. Some even had infrared vision. If he really wanted to avoid their nose and eyes, he would need the help of an alchemy potion. Of course, this was just a deodorizing spray refined by Crow. It did not have the function of blocking infrared light, but it was fine as long as he was not seen. After making sure that every corner of her body was evenly spread, Huai Shi rubbed her hands, took a deep breath, and jumped over the high wall by clinging onto a crack in the wall. Fortunately, he found a pair of anti-cut gloves in the storage room before he left. Otherwise, he would have taken a big hit from the barbed wire and glass shards on the wall. After landing, he saw that there was no one around. He was relieved. Taking advantage of the night around 9 o'clock at night, he entered the place that resembled an office building. The 2-story office building was not big. There were a few departments scattered around, but there was no one around. The doors were not locked. This transit warehouse had not had any business for a long time, so there was no need for these things. Huai Shi's face was covered in dust, but she couldn't find anything. Looking out the window, he could see the brightly lit warehouse and the staff dormitory next to it. If he really wanted to find something, he would have to go there. However, the people going in and out were all wearing strange white uniforms. It was difficult to sneak in. Logically speaking, this kind of physical work would avoid any white or dirty colors, but it seemed to be completely different here. The white coat was too wide, and there was even a hood. There was only a snake emblem on the chest that he had never seen before. Huai Shi looked at it for a long time, then hammered his palm. Good, I have to find a way to King do it. Then, the target was very important. He hid behind the window for a long time before he saw a person walk to the foot of a nearby wall, lift up his hem, untie his belt, and start to urinate everywhere. Wow, so unethical? Huai Shi was stunned. He saw the indescribable part of the other party with the help of the faint light. He could not help but sigh in pity. It's you, little fire dragon. In order to avoid alerting the enemy, he quietly jumped over the other side of the building. But just as he jumped out of the window, he felt a beam of light hit his face. Huai Shi looked up in surprise and saw another security guard who was also peeing in the corner. How could they hide so well? At that moment, the two of them looked at each other. Who? The patrolling security guard widened his eyes and reached for the baton on his waist. Where did the thief come from? Don't misunderstand. Huai Shi's mind raced. Without waiting for him to call out, he raised his hand to stop him. I'm from the gospel class. What's that? The security guard was stunned. He seemed to have heard of this before. Immediately, he was suspicious. Really? Aren't you coming tomorrow? Of course it's true. Look if you don't believe me. Dong qiao qiao, dong qiao qiao. As he spoke, Huai Shi began to twist and turn, taking 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. Then, he opened his mouth and sang, entering the home of God, sitting by the Lord's side, the sweetness is better than our mothers, Hallelujah to heaven! Taking 2 steps forward, Huaishe suddenly kicked the security guard against the wall. Without waiting for him to fall off the wall, Huaishe opened his hand and stuffed all the ashes into his mouth. The security guard rolled his eyes and fainted. This is at least 4 or 5,000 yuan. You've made a big profit. Huaishe patted the dust off his hand, shook his head helplessly, and jumped back into the room with him. When he jumped out of the window again, he was already wearing his damn white uniform, with a baton on his waist and a flashlight in his hand. If he wore a hood, he would be another security guard. No one would be able to tell if they didn't look closely. He could only be thankful that the corporate culture of the Guijing people was good. The gospel class took turns, and even the praise master and Yanga singers were the same. Fortunately, he still remembered the tune of the gospel class. Otherwise, wouldn't he have wasted his time today? Huaishe whistled, picked up the flashlight, and swayed toward the center of the transit warehouse. Everything looked normal. Nothing unusual happened. There was no bloody scene. Only the guys in white robes came in and out. Some were still lying in the dormitory, scratching their feet and playing mobile games. It was normal. If he didn't ignore the damn clothes, it would have looked like a factory. The entire transit warehouse was too big. He wandered around aimlessly and couldn't find any targets or gains. He even began to wonder if he was being paranoid and if Wang Hai was hiding here. Until his footsteps came to an abrupt stop outside the seemingly ordinary warehouse in the southwest corner. He lowered his head. He saw the ash gradually gathering in his hand. It was the dissipated source substance in the air, filled with the residue of despair and death. Someone died here. In an instant, his hair stood on end. There was more than one. Under the attraction of the hand of confinement, it continued to gather. In Huaishe's hand, it quickly gathered into a small pile. Huaishe was stunned for a moment. He walked around the warehouse and found that the dissipated source substance did come from the warehouse. He casually kicked the collected ash into his pocket and began to look for the entrance. The entire warehouse was sealed from the inside. It seemed that other than the door outside, it was difficult to enter. But Huaishe found a ventilation window about 4 meters above the ground at the back of the warehouse. Just as he was thinking about finding something to climb in, he suddenly smelled a very familiar smell. The smell of blood. When he turned around and lifted the door that was covering the trash, he saw the body that was hidden under it. He was stunned. Was that another security guard? Chapter 60. He had just died, and blood was still flowing out. Huaishe squatted down and stared at the body in front of him in confusion. He pulled out a stick from the trash and fiddled with it. The arm was broken, there was a knife wound on the back, a punctured lung, and a fatal wound on the throat. It was a clean cut, almost split in half. Very quickly, Huaishe put down the stick and the door plank in her hands and covered the corpse again. She turned around and looked at the ventilation window behind her. After taking a few steps forward, she turned around and estimated that the distance was about right. Then, she sprinted forward with all her might. She jumped up and stepped on the wall to move up 30 centimeters. He just reached the pipe on the wall. However, when he lowered his head to look, he found that his footprints overlapped with another faint footprint. When he raised his head and propped himself up, he saw the fingerprints in the dust by the window. Someone had gone in, and their physiques were similar to his, and they were both sublimators who had undergone secondary development. Otherwise, they might have been the champion of a national competition in the fast jump, or even won an indoor climbing award. There was no sound in the warehouse. There was no extra sound. Huaishe quietly landed and looked around, only to see piles of boxes and wires on the ground. The wires extended to the front and disappeared into the wall. Huaishe only saw a huge iron door, and a cold wind was blowing out from behind the iron door. He sensed it deeply, and it was indeed a cold wind. This crappy thing was a cold storage. After mustering up his courage, He went in and took a look around. In the end, he only saw a mountain of pork. The only thing he found was probably 2 corpses that had not yet frozen solid. They had obviously been thrown in at random. The wound was exactly the same as the one on the security guard outside, and it was equally ruthless and fatal. Huai-Shi reached out, pulled out the sacrificial knife, and looked around carefully. After a long battle of wits and courage with the air, he had to admit regretfully that he was about to freeze into a retard. Also, the murderer might have left long ago. He walked out of the cold storage, and couldn't help but sneeze. The sneeze echoed in the warehouse for a long time, but it didn't attract anyone's attention. From the looks of it, other than the corpses, it was just an ordinary factory. However, at this moment, the ashes in his hand were rapidly appearing. In just a few minutes, he had already accumulated almost half of his bag. The concentration of origin substances floating in the air was shockingly high. Pain and despair radiated from him at all times, almost turning the entire warehouse into a haunted house. Most people wouldn't be able to stand it after staying here for more than a few minutes. Only an idiot like Huai-Shi would go around looking for plastic bags to collect the ashes. In any case, the shattered origin substance had been scattered from this place. There must be a source. After repeated calculations and experiments, Huai-Shi finally found where it came from. In fact, there was no need to deliberately calculate. Everyone could clearly see such a large crack in the wall. The secret space that was originally hidden behind the wall was not sealed. The verification of the iris and fingerprint did not work. In any case, with such a large dead person's arm stuck on the slide rail, the freezer on the floor couldn't be pushed over, right? With such a large entrance right in front of his eyes, it took him a long time to find it by relying on the concentration of the ashes. Huai-Shi once again gained a new understanding of his investigative abilities. Behind the door was a dark space. Stepping over the corpses on the ground and continuing forward, he could see a staircase that extended downwards into the darkness. In the silence, he silently crept forward. He vaguely saw a shadow with its back facing him. He immediately pulled out his handgun nervously and carefully approached. But just as his handgun was pressed against the back of the person's head, the person fell forward like a piece of rotten wood, crashing to the ground. He had already lost his life. Bang! The sacrificial knife and the dagger that came from the darkness behind him collided, creating a sharp sound. Someone had taken advantage of Huai-Shi's distraction to hide in the darkness and try to stab him in the back. However, they didn't expect that Huai-Shi had a bug-like premonition of death. In the instant of the collision, Huai-Shi turned around, stomped the ground, and rushed forward. In the almost lightless darkness, he charged toward the person. The so-called blind fight also required skill. No, it would be more appropriate to say that it was a cold weapon fight in the dark. A person's joints, the way they held their weapons, and even their moves were limited. If one was familiar with this, the moment the weapons collided, one could even guess the opponent's position, the posture, and even the posture of the weapon. Although it seemed thrilling, in the final analysis, it was a cruel game of deduction that was as good as drawing cards. However, some people had already turned the process into instinct. In the darkness, the two collided. At the same time, Zhang Heng raised his elbow to block the other's hand that was holding the gun. Then, the dagger and the sacrificial knife collided again. In the ink-like darkness, there were constantly sparks flying in the air without any pattern. It was a sign of the coldness of the collision of the blades. The two tacitly did not choose to shoot. Instead, they tried to kill each other as silently as possible. In just a few seconds of fighting, the weapons had collided several times. In the end, the two sides found each other's location in the darkness at the same time. They turned around, took a step forward, and slashed with all their strength. The sacrificial knife and the dagger collided again. A spark burst out from the friction between the two metals, illuminating the two people close to each other and the masks on their faces. One of them was wearing a Peppa Pig mask. The other was wearing a Ma Baoli mask. In an instant there was a dead silence. The original murderous intent disappeared, and was replaced by an indescribable awkwardness. In the silence, Ma Baoli was the first to break the silence. She coughed twice and said, "What a coincidence!" "Yes." Huaishur nodded. "What a coincidence!" The atmosphere fell into awkwardness again. In the endless staring contest, the person on the other side asked again, "How should I address you?" "A real man never changes his name," Huaishur replied proudly. "Just call me Little Peppa Pig from Huaihai Road." "What about you?" "Nice to meet you." The person on the other side introduced herself. "Little Peppa Pig from Hutai Road." Thus, the atmosphere became awkward again. They could not fight any more. Although he had never heard of Little Peppa Pig from Hutai Road, why did he feel like he had seen her somewhere before? Huaishur was silent for a long time. Then, he asked, "Have you eaten?" "Yes." Little Peppa Pig nodded. "Are you taking a walk?" "Yes." Another 2 sentences of meaningless conversation. Perhaps it was because she knew that the other party's background was similar to hers, or perhaps it was because she did not want to waste any more time. Little Peppa Pig took the initiative to make a suggestion. "Then, shall we walk?" "Yes, let's walk." Huaishur took a step back. The 2 of them slowly put away their swords and separated themselves. They leaned against the wall and maintained the greatest vigilance. At the same time, they gestured for the other party to go first. It would be better to expose the vital parts of their back. Then, they realized that the other party was not stupid and was too easy to fool. They could only advance together. Inexplicably, when Huaishur came to his senses, he realized that he seemed to have gained another teammate. On the short flight of stairs, the 2 of them exchanged some meaningless pleasantries. Then, they racked their brains to find out where the person who copied their character came from. Finally, the 2 of them stopped at the end of the stairs. There were 2 forks in the road. One went up and seemed to lead to somewhere else, while the other went down and led deeper underground. Little Peppa Pig looked around. Finally, her gaze fell on Huaishur. Down? Her meaning was self-evident. Since it was difficult to trust each other, it was better to split up. But should it be up or down? Huaishur scratched his head and thought for a long time. Then, he said, "Man walks to higher places, and water flows to lower places. So, it's up, then?" Little Peppa Pig waved her hand and walked down the path. However, she did not expect Huaishur to follow behind her. She was stunned. "Didn't you say that man walks to higher places? So, sometimes you might as well make a cup of happy otaku." Huaishur replied sincerely. What he said seemed to be very philosophical. What a joke. His investigation ability was so weak that it took him more than 10 minutes to find an open hidden door. If he walked alone, he might not even know if the important items floated past him. Interstellar players were too sad. It was better to find someone to come with them. After all, they were all thieves. Huaishur did not want any stolen goods. He could even help. It was reasonable to just want to share information, right? Of course, he would never admit that this place was too dark and gloomy. He was a little scared. "Are you sure?" Little Peppa Pig looked at him deeply. "Forget it. As long as you don't get in the way, I'll pick first. You can have them all." Huaishur waved his hand. He had no interest in the stolen goods or the property of the purified people. He was only here to find someone. It would be a pleasant surprise if he could find out why these guys were hiding in the warehouse of his previous home. Just as they were moving forward, the 2 of them stopped abruptly. There was someone in front. Or rather, they finally saw a place that looked like a concierge. Behind the window, they could see a small room. There was a pot of stew on the stove, and a song and dance was playing on the TV. The middle-aged man guarding the place was sitting on a chair with his back facing the window. He was watching TV and eating snacks attentively. He did not even look at the surveillance screen in the corner. Little Peppa Pig pressed Little Peppa Pig back when she pulled out the knife. "Don't be so rough. Huai sighed. Let me do it, let me do it. He put on his hood again, picked up the security guard's baton and flashlight, walked over and knocked on the window. He was about to resume his old business of gospel singing when he saw the pot on the stove. There was a human head slowly rising and falling in the pot of stew. There were also a few arms and legs stewed until they were soft and tender. The security guard and the concierge turned around. Huai opened his mouth several times but did not know what to say. In the end, he sighed. He pulled out the sacrificial knife. Some things it was better to be rough. Chapter 61. 10 seconds later, Huai sat calmly in the gatehouse, extinguished the fire in the furnace, and pulled out the shiny sacrificial knife from the withered corpse. Ma Baoli came in and walked around, marveling at Huai knife skills. Huai looked at the passage behind the gatehouse and asked casually, "Old Lu, what's hidden behind this?" "It should be their fasting circle," Ma Baoli said casually, then jumped up in shock. F***ck, how did you know it was me? Huai looked back at him. "I was just asking casually. After all, I don't know many people who are so flirtatious." "Ahem, I was just asking casually." Ma Baoli looked at him innocently. "Who's old Lu?" "A bald man." "That's enough." The two looked at each other in the gatehouse. After a long time, Yu Dongri looked away helplessly. "Who are you?" Huai asked. "As you can see, a cowherd." Yu Dongri shrugged. "I'm also the 4th-class security officer of the Astronomy Society and a bunch of other miscellaneous positions, huh?" Huai was stunned. "What's that?" "It's a double insurance that bypasses the regulations." Ma Baoli sat on the chair and sighed. In some sensitive areas, the Astronomy Society uses a double supervision system. There are 2 supervisors, one in the light and one in the dark. The former is involved in disputes, and the latter is responsible for recording the truth and secretly investigating when the former is inconvenient. Just like the purified people this time. On one hand, I'm Ai Qing's examiner, responsible for reviewing whether she can use the authority of a supervisor fairly. On the other hand, I'm also her bodyguard and fighter. But in order to avoid sensitive issues by directly deploying a sublimator, I can only take a detour, you understand? So you committed a crime. More or less. Yu Dongri sighed. In short, once this matter is over, I will leave. In order to avoid failing my year-end evaluation, you have to pretend that you don't know anything. I've also written in the report that you're born with divine strength and don't know martial arts. How about we help each other out? Huai looked at him warily. Will I be killed if I don't help? If you don't help, you'll have to return the gift I gave you. I will help, I will help. Huai instantly revealed a smile. Really, we're so close that we don't have to be so distant. I'll give you 2 more sets of overlords later. Yu Dongri tried very hard to resist the urge to kill this little bastard on the spot. By the way, did Ai Qing pass or not? I've already passed the first year, all right? Yu Dongri rolled his eyes behind the mask. If it weren't for the fact that this place is related to the deep hell, Shanghai, I would have left long ago. I wouldn't have had to suffer like this. Also, what's Shanghai? Go ask Ai Qing when you get back. I've already said enough. Yu Dongri stood up, not wanting to argue with him any longer. Ever since he had gotten involved with this guy, nothing good had happened to him. After spending some time to take care of the surveillance, he took the key that he had found on the guard's clothes and opened the door to the back. He saw a pile of open boxes piled up in the corner, and a nauseating stench filled the air. It smelled like something rotten. After entering this place, Huai felt an unknown amount of origin substance begin to gather around him. The bag that was originally used to store the ashes suddenly became bulging. The despair in the air almost suffocated him. Those death records had definitely floated out from here. However, contrary to his expectations, there wasn't anyone guarding this place at all. Why are there so few people? Yu Dongri surveyed his surroundings and said in a muffled voice, "This can only mean one thing, which is that they're retreating. Let's not talk about the people outside, but the real higher-ups have probably already run away, right?" As he spoke, he walked into the deepest part of the room. It was like a plaza. Traces of abyss sediment floated in the air, exuding a powerful poison that normal people would find hard to resist. The ground was carved with indecipherable inscriptions, as if this was the scene of some kind of sacrifice. Even the sacrificial blade in Huai Shi's arms began to tremble with excitement. Huai Shi stepped inside. Apart from the blood-stained platform in the center, there were only large mirrors around him. Each one was about the size of a shopping mall's entrance, and they were all intricately placed in the center of the plaza. Even though they were clearly mirrors, their reflections couldn't be seen. It was incredibly strange. "This is the fasting circle." Yu Dongri's voice was emotionless. "This is the method that the purified citizens use to raise border mutants. Do you see those mirrors? They're actually all cages that have been blessed after a ceremony. They lead to a separate hell known as a mirror realm. They use the mirrors to bring the border mutants back from hell, and then raise them in the mirror realm. They feed them with flesh and blood until they finally obtain a predator that listens to them. Now all of the cages are empty." But a shadow curled up in the corner seemed to have kicked something. Noticing that they were looking at him, he turned around and tried to run away, but Huai Shi pressed him to the ground. "Mercy! Mercy!" The fat man lay on the ground, trembling. "I don't know anything. Really. I'm only responsible for burning the boiler. I don't know anything." Around his neck hung several gold chains of different styles. On his arms were various bracelets inlaid with gold or jade. Even his 10 fingers were covered with rings of various colors. His body was adorned with all kinds of jewelry, and even his shoes looked like high-end handmade work. However, no matter how one looked at him, he looked like a thief. He had nothing to do with the expensive jewelry on his body. Being pressed down by Huai Shi, he began to tremble. There was even a fishy smell coming from his crotch. He had already peed. "I really don't know anything. I only know how to burn the boiler. What they did has nothing to do with me. I also want to live. Spare me, spare me." Huai Shi frowned and was about to ask when he noticed that Yu Dongri patted him on the shoulder and pointed to the front. There was a small door there. Don't touch my family." The fat man's eyes widened as he struggled. Come at me. They are innocent. Don't touch my wife and daughter. Please, please." Yu Dongri did not speak. He quickly stepped forward and kicked. Bang! The door was kicked open. The narrow space behind was revealed. The first thing they saw was a huge boiler. The flames were jumping inside, and thick smoke was rising from the chimney. It was unbearably hot. But in the open furnace, in addition to the red-hot charcoal and coal, there were a few lumps of charcoal that were vaguely distinguishable as limbs. They were about to be burned to ashes. When Huai Shi looked away, he saw luxury goods, all kinds of luxury goods were hung in almost every corner. There were high-end suits cut open to be used as bed sheets, branded satchels stuffed with pots and pans, expensive watches, necklaces, bracelets, and wallets that were strung together and hung on the wall. There was only a dirty bed in the corner. There was a blow-up doll covered with tape lying on the bed. There were 2 Barbie dolls next to it. They were exquisitely and adorably dressed. The fat man screamed and struggled with all his might to break free from Huai Shi's grip. He crawled up and threw himself onto the bed. He hugged the inflatable doll and the little person in his arms and cried loudly. He turned around and said something about begging for mercy. Huai Shi opened his mouth to ask something, but no words came out. Only Yu Dongri walked up, rolled up his sleeves and pulled the fat man up. He kept asking questions and even used his ability. After a long time, he let go of his hand in frustration and threw the fat man on the ground. "It's useless. He's gone crazy." Yu Dongri lit a cigarette in annoyance. Damn, nothing good will come out of being involved with this group of lunatics. Then let's go. Isn't there a fork in the road? Why sure couldn't stand it anymore. He turned around and wanted to leave. But for some reason, he accidentally saw the fat man's finger. To be exact, it was the index finger of his right hand. Then, he froze in place. Yu Dongri, who was walking in front, noticed that he didn't follow. He turned around in confusion. Let's go. What's wrong? You go first. Huai Shi was silent for a long time. I have something to do. I'll catch up with you later. Yu Dongri looked at him in confusion. He didn't know what he was thinking. He wanted to ask, but when he saw the teenager's eyes, he couldn't ask. He had never seen such a calm expression on Huai Shi's face. It was so calm that it made people uncomfortable. It was as if there was something chilling hidden behind that layer of shell. I'll be at the door. Yu Dongri turned around and left. In the silence, Huai Shi listened to his footsteps as he walked away. He walked into the incineration room and gently closed the door. That ring! He looked down at the fat man's right index finger. He looked at the platinum ring inlaid with broken diamond. That ring, where did you get it? I don't know what you're talking about. The crying madman looked at him blankly. He subconsciously hid his right hand behind his back and dodged backward. I picked it up. I picked it up. Bang. His head hit the wall and squashed his inflatable wife. His fat face was almost deformed and twisted into a strange shape. Let me ask you. Huai Shi lowered his head and looked into his eyes. He asked word by word, that ring, where did you get it? In the violent collision, the madman screamed in confusion. I don't know. I don't know anything. I'm just a boiler. Spare me, Huai Shi closed his eyes. He covered the madman's mouth with his palm. When he opened his eyes again, his eyes were crazily bloodshot. Immediately after, pitch-black ashes emerged from his palm and poured into his body. For the last time, he leaned down and stared at the madman's face. The ring, where did you get it? The man's eyes widened and tears flowed down. He opened his mouth and wanted to scream, but he couldn't make a sound. Huai Shi picked up his two daughters on the ground with one hand and crushed them one by one. In front of his eyes. I don't know. I really don't know. The man finally broke down and wailed. Why did you kill them? Why? I'm just doing my job and burning the boiler. Those things. They said they didn't want it. I just wanted to give them some gifts. Huai Shi let go of his hand. The madman pounced on him crazily and wanted to strangle his neck, but he was kicked away. In the end, he curled up in the corner and hugged the remains of a few dolls, sobbing in despair. I'm sorry. Huai Shi lowered his eyes and walked up to him. He grabbed his hand and violently pulled the ring off. Then, he turned and left. The door closed behind him. Are you okay? Yu Dongri, who was leaning against the wall in the corner and smoking, asked. Pretty good. Huai Shi looked at the ring in his palm and put it in his pocket. He said, couldn't be better. Boom. In that instant, a violent explosion suddenly came from above them. The earth quaked and the mountains shook. Countless fragments fell from the ceiling and smashed down, crushing the empty mirror into pieces. Chapter 62. It shook violently as if explosives had exploded above. They could hear gunshots in the distance, as if someone was constantly attacking this place. Tremors and roars continued to sound from the underground space. Huai Shi and Yu Dongri looked at each other and remembered the unexplored path. They ran up the stairs. When they reached the end of the path, they only saw corpses all over the floor. It seemed that this was the gathering place of the entire sacrificial grounds. The spacious office was decorated magnificently, but at this moment, the glorious pillars and reliefs on the walls were covered in blood. Corpses lay on the ground one after another. Their faces were filled with confusion and despair. Even the flattering smile had not dissipated. Gunshots continued to sound from the inner area. The massacre was ongoing. When they broke into the inner room, they only saw Wang Hai hiding behind the table and begging for mercy. There was also a burly figure standing in front of the table. Under the sleeves of the heavy coat, there were 2 hands covered in scales. There was also a pair of pitch-black machetes. Blood dripped from the blade of the machete and drew a scarlet trail on the ground. It extended toward Wang Hai step by step. "If you dare to kill me, God will not let you go." Wang Hai was forced into a corner. His face was pale. "I am the representative of God. How dare you? If I die, you will pay the price." "Definitely." He waved the dagger in his hand, but it was useless. The man with the machete stepped forward and cut the obstacles in front of him into pieces. The machete whistled and slashed toward Wang Hai's head. Yu Dongri pulled out his gun. Huai Shi never thought that his marksmanship would be so good that he could hit the blade in the air. Then, the remaining 5 bullets all hit the back of the man's head. Unfortunately, after piercing through the clothes and scales, it was unable to penetrate the mutated skull. The man with the machete staggered. The blade fell between Wang Hai's legs, causing him to let out a short and sharp scream. Tears and snot were already out of fear. "Help! Help!" As if he saw his savior, he looked at the 2 people who rushed in and shouted, "Help me! I have money! I have tens of millions! I'll give you whatever you want!" Needless to say, how could Huai Shi watch as the last person who knew the inside story was killed in front of him? He decisively pulled out his pistol and aimed at the man with the knife, who had turned around and pulled the trigger repeatedly. Amidst the roaring gunshots, sparks spewed out from the barrel of the gun. Along with the scorching red bullet, it flew towards the face of the wielder that had already transformed to the point where it could no longer be seen as a human. Its face, which was covered in scales, was not much different from the crying snake's. There were only 2 small holes, and its dark green lips could not hide its sharp teeth. What was even more frightening was its pair of golden vertical pupils. It was hard to tell if it was more like a lizard or a snake. That was a strange characteristic of cold-blooded animals. It made one's heart turn cold. Just as Huai Shi raised his pistol, the scimitar in his hand had already been raised to protect his face. The black scimitar was like a shield, deflecting all the bullets. Then, the scimitar in his right hand slashed towards Yu Dongri. However, before the scimitar in his left hand could change direction, he heard the whistling of the wind beside his ear. It was like a sharp axe. Page, who was 7 steps away, was already in front of him. The sacrificial knife in his hand was swinging horizontally towards his neck. So fast, the golden vertical pupils quickly contracted, and the scimitar in front of his eyes blocked the sacrificial knife. However, it felt like it had collided with an axe. The blocking posture was instantly destroyed by the terrifying inertia. It was like a hot knife through butter. At that moment, Huai Shi saw the Naga holding the knife suddenly tilt. It was as if he had slipped. But then, the air seemed to have turned into a viscous substance. Under the stirring of the Naga's arms, an undercurrent appeared and knocked Huai Shi to the point of staggering. Then, he saw the Naga fly into the air. No, it should be said that he was swimming in the sea, because the air around him had instantly turned into a nearly liquid state. It broke free from the shackles of gravity and swam in the invisible sea. This was his sole ability. In an instant, he dodged Huai Shi and Yu Dongri's pincer attack. Then, he spun nimbly in the air. The scimitar in his hand cut through the liquid air and slashed towards the 2 people who were unable to adapt to such a situation. Yu Dongri blocked in a sorry state, but Huai Shi threw out a plastic bag. The plastic bag was broken by the blade. Then, the ash inside was quickly activated under the influence of the hand of confinement. In an instant, the invisible sea was contaminated by the ash and turned pitch black. Violent coughing sounds were heard, but Huai Shi did not stop moving. He threw himself straight into it. Yu Dongri was dumbfounded. When did his little brother become so stubborn? But in an instant, he heard the sharp hiss of a snake in the darkness. The red sacrificial knife pierced through the pitch-black sea and came out from the other side. Blood flowed on the blade. In an instant the sea exploded. The burly Naga fell to the ground. There was a miserable cut on his left arm. It was almost completely cut off by the sacrificial knife. In the sharp sound of the blades colliding, Huai Shi was expressionless. He suddenly raised his foot and stomped down. Bang! The Naga who fell to the ground suddenly shook. The scimitar in his right hand was knocked away by Huai Shi's sacrificial knife. The teenager wearing the Pepsi mask trampled on his chest, raised the sacrificial knife with both hands, and suddenly stabbed down. Execution! Bang! At that moment, an arm suddenly stretched out from the gap in the snake man's coat. It held a scimitar and blocked the attack, even though the hand was chopped into pieces by the force of the axe on the blade. A third hand? Then a fourth hand. In the gap, the fourth hand hidden behind the Naga stretched out. It held a short-barreled shotgun, aimed at Huai Shi's face, and pulled the trigger. The teenager's movement was faster than his. He leaned back in an instant and dodged the sudden killer. Yu Dongri saw it clearly. Not only did the serpent man suddenly grow 2 extra arms, but there were also wisps of gray mist rising from the young man's body in that instant. It was the ashes that erupted from the seal. They danced like flames, and the power of pain radiated in all directions. The whole inner room was shrouded in irresistible despair. Beneath the mask, the pair of pitch-black eyes had unknowingly turned completely red. It was like a burning fire. The thin teenager had turned into an evil spirit in the mountain. What kind of sacred mark was this? In the pedigree that Yu Dongri knew, there was no such existence. Even if it was only at the mercury level, it was so terrifying. But he had no time to think. He instinctively rushed forward, lifted the mask, and wanted to force the 4-armed Naga to see his face. Then, he felt that his leg was entangled by something. It was a tail. A slender snake tail. No, it should be said, Yu Dongri finally remembered. The sacred mark on that guy was not a Naga, but a gold-level sacred mark that originated from the second stage of the Brahmin pedigree in India. Naga. The characteristic of having 4 arms was probably a mutation that had been passed down to Myanmar. Then, he was thrown out. At the last moment, he threw out the short knife in his hand, trying to restrain the counterattacking Naga. But then, he saw that one of Naga's arms abandoned the machete, took out a flash bomb from his arms, and threw it at them. The next moment, a violent flash of light engulfed them. Huai Shi quickly retreated, and the blade in his hand slashed forward. It seemed that nothing had been hit, but it seemed that he had cut something. Then, they heard the sound of a gunshot. In the intense dizziness and nausea, Huai Shi bent down, took out a bag of ashes from his arms, and threw it on the ground. The black fog engulfed everything. This move seemed to prevent the opponent from taking the opportunity to sneak attack, but when they recovered from the intense dizziness, they could no longer see Naga. He had escaped. Wang Hai was left in a pool of blood on the ground. His throat and chest had been cut open by a sharp blade, and blood was gushing out. He could not say anything. Huai Shi rushed forward and reached out to check his pulse, but soon, he withdrew his fingers. There was no saving him. A layer of dark green appeared on the wound, and the knife was dipped in poison. No, if it was the poisonous dragon Naga, it would be strange if it was not dipped in poison. Yu Dongri took a look and did not waste any more time. He seized the time to rummage through all the valuable documents. Huai Shi helped Wang Hai up from the ground and tried to open his eyes. "Wake up. You still have time. Who killed you?" He took out the ring from his pocket. "Who killed them? Who told you to hide here? Speak." Wang Hai. Wang Hai struggled with all his might, like a fish out of water. His 2 hands struggled to grab the life that abandoned him. He left a trail of blood on Huai Shi's collar and tore off Huai Shi's mask. When he saw Huaishi's face, he was stunned. Soon, his eyes became resentful and vicious. It's all your fault. His lips opened and closed, and he kept spitting out blood. But soon, a mocking smile appeared on his face. We will all die soon. He suddenly stopped struggling and grabbed the dagger beside him. He stabbed at his heart. Bang! Scarlet spurted out and fell on Huaishi's blank face. The fire burned. In the violent vibration, the upper layer seemed to explode again, and the bottom layer was about to collapse. Huaishi sighed and slowly put Wang Hai down. He put away the ring. What happened after that was nothing to write home about. Yu Dongri took him out of the transit warehouse before the Special Affairs Department arrived, and even drove him home. Looking at his distracted look, Cowherd could not help but shake his head. I know you have a lot of questions to ask. Have a good rest tonight. You can come to the detective's office tomorrow. Huaishi nodded, got out of the car, and watched him go away. When he returned home and opened the door of the living room, he saw Crow waiting there. You seem to need someone to talk to. The black bird stood on top of the boiling kettle and asked, Coffee? Tea? Chapter 63. When Huaishi put down the teacup, he felt as if the world had suddenly become clear. He didn't know if he should say that he was relieved of a burden, or if he had gained some enlightenment. He was as calm as a monk in meditation. There was no fluctuation in his heart, as if he had gained enlightenment and seen through the world of mortals. Soon, he reacted and looked down at the rippling purple in the teacup. What is this? It's a special type of spiritual anesthetic. Crow raised his wings and pointed to the remaining tube on the table. I cut off some leftovers from the crying snake's horn and made 2 tubes. If you like them, I'll give them to you. Anesthetic? Huaishi asked, what is it used for? Let me think about how to put it. Crow pondered for a moment. If the physical anesthetic is to block out the pain, then it is to let you temporarily abandon your desires. After taking it, for a short period of time, you won't feel anger, hesitation, or sadness. At the same time, you won't feel happiness, or pleasure. According to the creator of the medicine, the thing that hinders people from pursuing enlightenment is this innate instinct and emotion. Only after losing all of this, people will gain calmness from nothingness, and obtain true rationality. And then? And then do what you need to do. Crow shrugged. It's just a tranquilizer. What magical effect can it have? But sometimes, this calmness that is not disturbed by external things is the most precious thing. At least the choice made in this situation will not make people regret it. As for the other effects, they are secondary. Huaishi understood. So it's a regret medicine? It should be called, no regret medicine. Crow asked, how do you feel? Very good. Huaishi let out a long breath and found a more comfortable position in the chair. He slowly relaxed and finally felt tired and sleepy. It was 3:00 in the morning. It was time to sleep. Then, Crow asked, did you get anything? Nothing, except for this. Huaishi swung his hand and threw the ring on the table. The platinum ring embedded with broken diamonds circled around the table a few times, then fell down and calmed down as it spun. The 2 names engraved on the inside of the ring were revealed. My parents are probably dead. In the silence, Huaishi lowered his head and stared at his parents' wedding rings, finally accepting this reality. Crow shook his head. Maybe he pawned it? Well, maybe. Maybe he lost it? That's possible. Huaishi nodded. Thank you for your medicine. I feel much more relaxed now. There's no need to thank me. Crow shook his head. Just treat it as a contractor's duty. I'm going to sleep first. Do you still have work to do? I'll probably have to work overtime. Crow turned around and looked at the dim glow that was slowly rising from the reactor. The last stage is almost over. You really should rest. Huaishi, have a good sleep. Everything will pass. Okay. Huaisher got up and walked to the bedroom. But when he stepped on the stairs, he saw the white mark on the wall where the family photo was originally hung. His footsteps stopped. After a long time, he said, "I really miss them." "I know." Crow turned his back to him and didn't say anything else. Only the sound of his footsteps gradually faded away. She quietly looked at the boiling metal light in the crucible, listening to the echoes like the sound of the tide. Like a patient farmer, waiting for the moment of maturity. A miracle from the abyss was silently brewing in the crucible. Not long after, Huaisher's puberty would come to an end. This was the last step of all the supplements, laying the foundation of the omnipotence of the stigmata. If puberty was always accompanied by growth, then growth was often painful. This pain was worth remembering and experiencing. It would eventually be engraved in the body along with the miracle. "Sleep, Huaisher," the black bird whispered softly. "I promise this is the last cruel education. From now on, you will have a bright future. As for the uninvited guest, leave it to the master of this place to deal with." Half an hour ago, in the collapsed sacrificial ground, in the inner room filled with stones, Wang Hai's corpse suddenly twitched. The dagger that pierced his heart quietly shattered, turning into black dust and merging into his cold blood. As a result, strands of viscous liquid slowly flowed out from the corpse, gradually condensing into an illusory shadow. Like a moth struggling out of a cocoon, it wriggled and greedily absorbed the blood on the ground. It wriggled and swallowed the corpses on the ground one by one, hissing in pain. "It's all your fault." A voice that sounded like a cry came from his throat, sharp and resounding. "It's all your fault, you're dead, we're all going to die." The Taoyes seed that had been implanted in this body since the baptism had finally sprouted in death. A strange creature made of origin substance was born from death with the final hatred of its host. Just like what the Lord had said to Wang Hai. The Saint God's final mercy had descended here. Even if the miracle from the abyss did not bring happiness and peace. "Hate. I hate." Tears of blood flowed down the distorted face that looked like Wang Hai's. The shadow crawled on the ground, wailing like a deformed hunting dog, rolling around in pain. In the end, it found a small button in a crack. Found it, it licked the button that had fallen off the youth's sleeve, letting out a happy and manic cry. "Found it, found it, found it, found you!" In an instant, the shadow surged and swallowed the button. It wriggled in ecstasy, drilling through the cracks and returning to the ground. It was impossible to see the shadow pass by on the ground. After breaking free from the restraints of matter, it was already so fast that it could not be seen with the naked eye. It leapt straight past the sleeping city, constantly bypassing all kinds of obstacles. It did not care about the people that brushed past it as it charged straight in the direction of the stone marrow hall. In the end, it passed through the gloomy forest and stopped outside the iron door. Under the moonlight, the shadow on the ground wriggled hungrily, constantly crashing forward. However, it could not pass through the iron door that was big enough for a stray cat to enter freely. In the end, it jumped through the crack in the wall, jumped into the weedy courtyard, and hungrily crawled toward Huaisher's lock. There was a pop like the sound of a bubble bursting. It was sent flying. In the broken window on the side of the main building, a pale face and a distorted body were reflected. It was like 7 or 8 people's organs were randomly pieced together. Several limbs were wriggling randomly, and the huge mouth in the abdomen was constantly opening and closing, dripping blood like saliva. It also reflected the figure in front of it. In the dirty glass, only a thin and tall figure could be seen. It could vaguely make out the clothes that were riddled with holes, the bow tie that was meticulously pinned to the broken collar, and the monocle that rested on the bridge of the nose. But at this moment, he was like a patrolling guard who saw a thief trying to climb over the wall. His face, which was clearly empty, showed unmistakable anger. The lips opened and closed in a silent warning. "Get out!" The completely out-of-control corroded body screamed, waving its limbs wildly, and pressing forward step by step. Then, the figure raised its left hand. The 5 fingers slowly closed. Silently, an invisible force closed in toward the center. Like a collision between iron walls, the ghost was squashed into a ball of paste. Then, the paste spontaneously combusted, leaving only a wisp of black smoke that disappeared into the air. The button that fell on the ground was carefully picked up. After washing it in front of the hose, the figure repeatedly wiped it with an old towel and put it in a box in the backyard's utility room. It was carefully placed together with a few dirty toys, 2 broken certificates, and an old photo of a baby. The box closed. The figure nodded slightly to Crow and said goodbye. Then, it silently dissipated. In the quiet room, the 4-armed Naga sat in front of the mirror, quietly wiping the blood on the wound. After cleaning the withered wound, he took out a knife and scraped the lifeless rotten flesh bit by bit, until the mournful bones below were exposed. He bent down and opened the box on the ground. After hesitating for a moment, he took out a tube of fiery red medicine. After opening the seal, he gritted his teeth and poured the boiling metal solution on the wound. In the sizzling sound, the Naga spasmed violently, letting out a dull roar. His long tail twitched, almost stirring the entire bathroom into pieces. In the end, the metal solution finally formed on the bones and merged with the flesh. It was like a new skin texture, indistinguishable from each other. Except for the tragic gap in the scales, no other wounds could be seen. He breathed a sigh of relief, as if he had collapsed. Removing the sacred mark, the burly Naga in the mirror slowly shrank. Even the 2 extra arms were retracted into the shoulder blade. The man named Hiluo was sweating profusely and panting. He looked at himself in the mirror. After a long time, he splashed his face with cold water and finally took 2 steps back. He slumped into the chair, his face pale. After a long time, he picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Boss," he said, "I might have screwed up." "Did you fail?" "No, the people who know are all dead. But when I was silencing them, I met 2 ascendants. I don't know where they are from." On the other end of the phone, Chiwon was silent for a long time. He sighed regretfully. "Then we can only use the backup method." The phone hung up. Chapter 64. In the morning, the underground warehouse of the city library welcomed its guests again. The professor looked like a mountain of meat as usual. When Ai Ching arrived, he seemed to be reading something interesting as he laughed from time to time. "You're early." When he saw Ai Ching, he closed his book. "You didn't sleep? It seems like the warehouse incident last night was really troublesome. I thought you would come in the afternoon." "There are a lot of trivial matters." Ai Ching, who hadn't slept all night, looked pale, but her expression was still calm. "It's better to solve it as soon as possible." "Coffee? Tea?" "Coffee, double sugar, no milk." "What a coincidence. I just got some good beans yesterday." The professor happily took out his tools. After a while, the aroma of coffee came from the drip pot. Soon, a cup of coffee was placed in front of Ai Ching. "Please enjoy." After Ai Ching finished the coffee, her face seemed to look better. After putting down the cup, which was still stained with sugar, she let out a long breath and tried to cheer herself up. She waited for the results of the investigation. Soon, a thick stack of documents was placed on the table. "The things you asked me to investigate are all here." The professor clapped his hands and arranged the copies of the contracts and the complicated documents in front of her. Since 12 years ago, Chiwon has already had some relationship with the Savior Society. The 2 sides have cooperated to a certain extent, but they have always maintained some boundaries. Unfortunately, there is no direct decisive evidence. But, as far as I know, the one who has been working with Chiwon all these years, no, the one who supports him, should be the Yin family, right? As he spoke, he placed a thick file in front of Ai Ching and asked curiously, Are you going to put righteousness before family this time? Which country are you talking about? Ai Ching rubbed her forehead in annoyance. Back then, Chiwen relied on being the Yin family's agent to save up the capital. From the beginning to the end, he was just a dog. Now, he is an old dog with an ambition that can't be controlled. Even if he dies, the Yin family won't lose a single strand of hair. What's more, would a guy like Chiwen leave any evidence behind? The professor shrugged and didn't say anything else. In the silence, there was only the sound of pages flipping. After giving up on the aimless search for the Savior Society's movement over the years and turning to the connection between Chiwen and the Savior Society, the professor's efficiency increased many times over. In just one day, they had obtained a large number of clues through various channels. After combining all the paper records of Xian High City in the underground library over the years, this thick stack of records was formed. Putting aside the large number of property rights changes, the transformation and changes of the industries under Chiwen in the past 2 years, as well as the special channel of Tomorrow News, even the various projects that Chiwen secretly operated were dug out. However, even Ai Ching couldn't believe the results of the investigation. He wants to monopolize the shipping routes and supplies at the border of Penghu? Ai Ching was amused by the results of the investigation. He is in charge of the transportation of goods and materials at the border of the sea? What makes him worthy? So far, it seems that he spent a large amount of money to lobby and guarantee, and he has already obtained the right to bid. The professor threw a macaron into his mouth and chewed. If there is someone behind him, it might not be impossible. Ai Ching understood. You mean the Yin family? The professor shrugged slightly. I only know that he has been running to Jinling very frequently these days. She had to admit that the professor's guess was very reasonable. The benefits of monopolizing the shipping routes at the border were definitely not just money, the hidden benefits behind it were also shockingly huge. Imagine, in a border that was isolated overseas, all the ascendants had to rely on themselves to travel and explore. If the Qi family could really bring such huge benefits to the Yin family, then the old man might not care about Qi Wen's alienation over the years. Rather, after the two sides let go of their previous grudges, the cooperation between the two sides would become even closer. And Qi Wen also fought for the initiative in this process. He was no longer an agent and a white glove that relied on someone else's charity, but a crucial collaborator that completed the transformation from a chess piece to a chess player. Things were different now. The more important it was at this juncture, the more she couldn't mess things up. If she wanted to use the Savior Society to investigate Chiwen, that old dog might do something. However, the next content of the file made her frown. Smuggling. Smuggling had never been a big deal, or rather, from a certain perspective, this gray industry was spread all over the world. Otherwise, where did the cheap and authentic goods in the country come from? However, the information hinted at by the next record made her expression turn serious. Can you be sure? Of course not. The professor shrugged. No one would reveal this kind of thing. No, everyone who knew the details has already been buried. How can we find any concrete evidence? However, the report compiled by the professor clearly linked the large number of missing people in the surrounding countries over the years with the Qi family's smuggling route. In other words, Chiwen might have been secretly smuggling a large number of people into Xian High. But after all, people were alive. Even an idiot needed to eat, drink, and defecate every day. A living person appearing in a big city might not be conspicuous, but thousands of living people appearing in a small place like Xian High. Even a ghost would know that something was wrong. But the problem was, where were the people? Where did they go? Did they disappear after coming to Xian High? No, if that was the case, thinking about the returned citizens after the Salvation Society and the mutants that they reared, Ai Ching had a guess of what happened to those people. In any case, the place that they went to would not be some kind of paradise. It looked like this was the basis of the cooperation between Chi-Wen and the Salvation Society. Chi-Wen provided them with an endless supply of people for their living sacrifices, while the purified people supported them in the dark under the guise of the Savior Society. Not only did they provide funds, they could even hand over some inconvenient tasks to them. This was a complete replica of Chi-Wen's gloves back in the Yin family. It was just that his gloves were whiter than the others. It looked like he had learned a lot. Just as she was deep in thought, Ai Qing's expression changed slightly. After a long time, she closed the file. What else? The professor looked confused. If that's the case, you must have something that you are waiting to sell, right? Ai Qing looked at the professor calmly. What else have you not taken out? The professor chuckled awkwardly. I still can't hide anything from you. He took out a thin folder from under the table. He placed it on the table but did not hand it over. Even though this information is not that important, I feel like it should be something that you should be concerned about. I promise it is worth the price. Ai Qing's expression was still cold. She was not in a hurry to promise the reward. She just looked at him quietly. After a long time, the professor sighed helplessly and pushed the folder over. You win, but this will cost you 3 times the original price. Ai Qing shook her head. I will only pay you twice the original price. Deal. The professor nodded, and his expression turned bitter and sad. Inside the folder was a stack of hospital records. There were medical records from the city, outside the city, and even foreign hospitals. There was also a detailed observation of the hospitalization process. The time was 8 years ago. The location was Xin High. 6 managers, 11 company executives, and a few dozen employees were all hospitalized because of various accidents and unexplained high fevers. At the time, there were even many rumors about the plague. Many years later, there were still people who remembered the panic in the market. But in the end, these were all small things that were not worth mentioning. These people were just ordinary people. There was nothing worth paying attention to. The only thing they had in common was that they had worked for the Huai Group and Chi-Wen's businesses to varying degrees. And the time was the year that the Huai family officially declared bankruptcy. After quietly reading the records in her hands, Ai Qing closed her eyes and let out a long sigh. Let me guess, she said softly. In the end, those people either became vegetative or were burned until they became retarded, right? The professor nodded. A soulless attraction. Ai Qing slowly opened her eyes. Her expression was gloomy. Without a doubt, this was a vicious incident caused by a virus that had been mutated by hell. A virus that parasitized and infected a human's body was not a problem that could be solved by normal antibiotic. When there were more than 10 abnormal situations, the local inspector should have immediately reported it to the astronomy committee. However, wasn't there a need to pay attention to how the report was submitted? Seriously reporting this as a vicious incident and casually mentioning a few abnormal situations in the corner of some records were 2 completely different results. To be able to settle this matter, that piece of trash must have received quite a bit of money. Ai Qing laughed coldly and tapped on the armrest. It seems like sending him to the border was too kind. Through a vicious virus, they had cleaned up all the insiders, leaving no evidence behind. And Chi-Wen had officially swallowed the last of the Huai family's foundation. He had obtained a large number of businesses at a price that was close to plundering. He had completed a bloody capital accumulation and successfully established his own shipping company on the Huai family's corp. He had gone from a penniless foreign merchant to a reputable tycoon in Xin High. It could be said that he had spent a lot of money. If there was no incitement from the Yin family behind this, where did he get the courage to act so recklessly? The professor suddenly said, but there is one thing that does not explain. I know what you want to ask. Ai Qing could not help but laugh coldly. It was nothing more than why he had spared Huai Shi's life after completely swallowing up the family's assets. Isn't this the most considerate thing about Chi-Wen, this loyal dog? Chapter 65. According to what Ai Qin knew, the relationship between the Yin family and the Huai family could be traced back to 80 years ago. At that time, Huai Shi's great-grandfather was a rare rank 4 ascendant. He obtained a large amount of wealth from the open borders and retired. At that time, it could be said that he had helped the Yin family a lot, and had played a significant role in reviving the declining Yin family. However, following the death of Huai Shi's great-grandfather, the Yin family began to rise again, but the Huai family had never produced another ascendant, and gradually declined. In the end, the Yin family chose to hit the Huai family while they were down when they needed funds the most, causing the Huai family to completely collapse. Following the death of Huai Shi's grandfather, Huai Shi's parents disappeared with a large amount of wealth. This was the straw that broke the camel's back. This process was so smooth that they could write 800,000 words. Even a ghost wouldn't believe that there wasn't something shady going on behind the scenes. It was a feast that everyone had worked together to create. Yin Shi ate the meat, Chi-Wen drank the soup, and in the end, Huai Shi was left as a fig leaf. Look, it's not that I don't care about our old friendship. This is just normal business competition. It's just that your family's descendants are too outrageous. For the sake of all those years ago, I'll leave you a piece of cake. How humane is that? You can't say that I'm going overboard now, right? Obtaining practical benefits, preserving the Yin family's face, and giving an explanation to his old friend who passed away. Isn't it great to have all three? In any case, in this world, everyone would carry the person on their side. With this layer of explanation, everything became bright and beautiful. It was simply unreproachable. As for Chi-Wen, that old dog, actually wanted to break free from the Yin family's chains after obtaining the ascension rank. That was another matter altogether. Over the years, Chi-Wen acted as a protective umbrella for the returned citizens, quietly hiding all of the Savior Society's actions in the dark. Using this method, he rapidly searched for benefits and quietly grew stronger. It was as if he had already become a powerful force. Even the Yin family couldn't casually punish him. Instead, they had to squeeze out a smile and show their sincerity to welcome this once loyal dog back into their embrace. Right now, that old master must be in a wonderful mood, right? Even though she was angry and gloomy, Ai Qin couldn't help but maliciously think that when that face full of age spots forced a smile, it must be very ugly. But then, her heart sank again. How was he supposed to break the bad news to Huai Shi? Now Huai Shi was watching the two of them quarrel. In the basement of the detective's office, once he stepped into the door, he heard the detective sigh. From how I see it, that group of returned pure people is going to do something big. I'm afraid Xian Hai will not be the only one in trouble. Shut the F***ck up. Yu Dongri was furious when he heard it. Can you stop making wild guesses? With that crow's mouth of yours, even if it's not, I'll make it sound like it is. Bullsh**t, this is called a reasonable guess. The detective sneered. Do you think I won't write a 100,000-word thesis for your Q.E.D.? Go ahead and write it. The ability restriction order on you hasn't expired yet. Aren't you afraid that Tian will use the Rainbow Bridge to send a group of defenders to kill you? I might not be able to write about the returned pure people causing trouble, but you think I can't write about you? If one day I'm going to die, I'll definitely sell you first. Under Huai Shi's shocked gaze, the two of them started to brawl. To be more precise, it was the detective who was beaten up. Soon, the detective with a swollen face started to beg for mercy. Yu Dongri was already used to this man's foul mouth, so he let go and stopped arguing with him. Only Huai Shi had a hard time believing the layout of this basement. Impressive. He glanced at the various guns and grenades hanging on the wall. Do you sell these things as well? If I did, I would have been caught by the Special Affairs Department a long time ago. I wouldn't have the time to sit here and talk. The detective rolled his eyes. These are all tools used by someone to commit crimes. F***ck off, I'm doing this to bring peace to the people. Lu Dongli was sitting on a chair. He untied the bandages and poured medicine on his wounds while grimacing in pain. With his upper body naked, the wounds on the man's body were quite scary. The wounds that looked like children's mouths quickly closed under the medicine. After a night of treatment, they did not look so bad anymore. After he finally sighed in relief, he put on his clothes and looked at Huaisheng seriously. You must have many questions to ask now. Huaisheng was silent for a long time before he scratched his head awkwardly. Actually, I've pretty much figured out everything that I need to know. There's nothing much to ask. If I really have to say something, I hope that Tian will deal with the issue of the returned pure people as soon as possible. Actually, they've already started. Yu Dongri looked troubled. But the problem is, Xianhai is not the only place facing this problem. I got the news from the action department last night. He sighed helplessly. The entire coastal area of Dongxia, including Xianhai, has discovered the returned pure people in more than 6 cities. Their fishing boats are even on the sea. If you ask me, I think they're really going to do something big this time. That's why they're in such a hurry to gather their forces. In fact, all the border hunters in the Jinling area have already started to mobilize, but Dongxia refused the Tian's intervention. In the end, they'll probably use the power of the Social Security Bureau. The Social Security Bureau is the upper-level organization of the Special Affairs Department. It's the department that manages the ascendants in Dongxia. Although the name is similar to another place, it's actually a separate and secret department. You'll probably get used to it in the future. Huaisheng was silent for a long time before he nodded. He noticed Yu Dongri's helpless expression and squeezed out a smile. Sorry, I didn't sleep well last night. It's normal. No one can sleep well in a situation like that. Yu Dongri comforted him as if he didn't notice anything. He put a cup of hot tea in front of him and said, Drinking more hot water is good for your health. It's hard to avoid dealing with such matters when working for the Astronomy Society. He deliberately avoided the scene of Huaisheng losing control last night. Although he could feel that Huaisheng was hiding something, Yu Dongri did not intend to delve into it. No one was born with godly strength, just like no one was born with perfection. There would always be times when everyone would encounter something troublesome. Chattering and asking too many questions would not solve any problems. It would only annoy others. However, he felt that something was different about Huaisheng. He didn't look like the young man from the past, nor did he look like the evil spirit he saw last night. She clearly looked like she hadn't woken up yet, but she gave people the feeling that she had finally been freed from a long dream and was able to return to the mortal world. Something was injected into the empty shell of a smile. It made him different from the past. Just as Yu Dongri was thinking uneasily, he suddenly heard a bang in front of him. He saw Huaisheng slap his knee and suddenly get up. His expression suddenly became flustered. F***ck. What's wrong? He looked up in surprise. I just remembered. Huaisheng slowly turned back, looking nervous. I don't think I practiced the piano today. Yu Dongri rolled his eyes and didn't want to say anything. Sure enough, he was overthinking. If this kind of guy was left alone, he would only be a fool for the rest of his life. After confirming that Yu Dongri's injuries were fine, Huaisheng was ready to leave. He was also told by Yu Dongri not to reveal his whereabouts. He was afraid that this guy was going to do some investigation next. Although Huaisheng wanted to know, he still had to report to Ai Qing this afternoon. He really didn't have time. But just as he was about to leave, he was stopped by Yu Dongri. Huaisheng, in the end, Yu Dongri couldn't help but worry. Are you okay? I'm fine. Huaishe turned back and waved at him with a smile. Don't worry. Just like you said, I have to learn to accept it, right? Yu Dongri was stunned. The door closed, and the young man's footsteps gradually faded away. Why did he leave? The detective, who had just rummaged through the boxes and cabinets to get the purchase list, looked in the direction of the young man's departure. After a long time, he shook his head and sighed. Wow, why does your little brother seem to be in a hurry? Yu Dongri sighed helplessly. Then, he turned around and rushed up to beat him. Shut the *CK up, crow. At 4:00 in the afternoon, it started to drizzle. The rainy season was about to begin. Fortunately, Huaishe moved quickly and rang Ai Qing's doorbell before the rain got wet. Since she was the only official member of the local astronomy club, she didn't need to set up an office in an office building. The office was directly set up in the study on the second floor of her house. According to Huaishe's conjecture, he even suspected that Ai Qing might have pocketed the venue rental fee that was given to her by the higher-up. It was really enviable, after arriving outside the door, looking at the exquisite little garden and villa behind the fence. Huaishe couldn't help but feel worried. They were all houses, but why did his house look so poor? Sure enough, he should sell some more powder and find someone to paint the outer wall, or buy a few new pieces of furniture. He thought as he was welcomed into the house by Ai Qing's maid and brought to the study on the second floor. "Mrs. waiting for you." She pushed the door open and motioned for Huaishe to come in. Ai Qing's study could only be said to be extremely simple. There were no bookshelves, elegant paintings, or potted plants. There was only a table and a chair for guests. Ai Qing seemed to be writing something on the computer. She frowned slightly and didn't notice Huaishe coming in. It wasn't until the maid served tea and reminded her in a low voice that she came back to her senses. "Sorry, I'm submitting some reports on the problems left behind by my predecessor." She rubbed her forehead and looked up at Huaishe. She was stunned for a moment. "What's wrong with you?" "Me? I'm fine." Huaishe smiled blankly and scratched his head. "Probably because you didn't sleep well?" Ai Qing looked at him strangely for a long time, as if she accepted this explanation, but she didn't say anything. Instead, she looked like she didn't know what to say. "Did something happen?" Huaishe asked. "No, nothing." Ai Qing shook her head and denied it. She took a deep breath and let out a long sigh. It was rare for her to lose her composure. "By the way, why did I call you over?" Huaishe wasn't sure. "I remember you said it was a courier?" "Yes, a courier." Ai Qing rubbed her eyebrows. After a long time, she suddenly said, "I remembered wrong. I originally wanted to say that the bounty for the red gloves has been issued." Huaishe was puzzled. The people of Green Sun generally have bounties on the Astronomical Association and various countries. Although most of them are similar to the bounty for the head, there are still quite a lot of bounties. A total of $47 million will be transferred to your account later. After being stunned for a long time, Huaishe finally reacted. Hearing that more than $3 million had fallen from the sky was like picking up a diamond-studded golden pillow when he was sleepy. He was overjoyed and excited. "Thank you." Ai Qing was silent for a long time. She glanced at the box under the table, and her expression became a little complicated. In the end, she didn't take it out. "Congratulations," she said. "From now on, you don't have to work for money anymore." Chapter 66. The transfer was not troublesome. To avoid trouble for Huaishe, Ai Qing even used the highest exchange rate in the past few days to help him convert the money into East Xia dollars. She transferred the money to him through the Astronomy Society's bank account to prevent him from being investigated because of the unknown source of his wealth. As a country of the Free City Alliance, The American Federation could be said to be the world's largest economy. It also had the world's largest reserves of gold and spirit crystals. It operated the world's largest spirit crystal exchange business, so the currency was very valuable. The exchange rate with East Xia dollars could reach 1. That was a total of more than $12 million. Suddenly, he became a rich man. Huai Shi was overjoyed. With so much money, even if it was only 1/3, it was enough for him to completely renovate his old house and buy a full set of new furniture. As for the remaining 2/3, half was given to Crow for budget and the other half was left for living expenses. It would allow him to live in this small city of Xianhai until the end of time. After throwing away the burden of being poor for so many years, his mood suddenly became much more relaxed. He slumped in the chair and did not want to move. "There's one more thing I want to tell you." Ai Qing took a deep breath, and her expression became serious. "The Astronomy Society has already labeled your act of killing the Red Gloves as a righteous act. In other words, the Special Affairs Division will not be able to find trouble with you anymore. I think we should terminate the contract, Huai Shi." Huai Shi looked at her with confusion. "Terminate the contract?" "Yes." Ai Qing nodded. "The current you no longer needs to work for me. In the end, you don't have any responsibility for all of this. You should regain the freedom you deserve. After this week, I will do the above and review in the weekly report. Soon, you can return to your life." Huai Shi looked at her in shock. After a long time, he scratched his head and asked curiously, "But if I leave, what will you do?" Ai Qing was stunned. After a long time, she closed her eyes and smiled tiredly. She just shook her head but did not explain anything. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Huai Shi did not hear clearly. "No, it's nothing." Ai Qing shook her head and stood up with the help of her cane to see him off. "You should go, Huai Shi. I hope you can realize your dream in the free world in the future." Her attitude was firm. Huai Shi didn't know what to say. He nodded slightly and was about to leave when he heard the phone on the table behind him. Soon, the call was picked up, and Director Fu's voice could be vaguely heard. There was also Ai Qing's suppressed anger. Qi Wen brought people here to turn himself in? How can he turn himself in just because he said so? Huai Shi stopped in his tracks. Soon, he closed the door and left. By the time Ai Qing arrived at the Special Affairs Department, the interrogation had already begun. What happened? Ai Qing tossed her umbrella aside and pushed open the door to the observation room without waiting for the wheelchair. Then, she saw Qi Wen drinking tea with Director Fu. Qi Wen put down his teacup and smiled helplessly at her. "Long time no see, Xiao Qing. I didn't expect you to see third uncle's ugly deeds." Ai Qing's expression was indifferent as she looked at Director Fu. Director Fu sighed and pointed at the one-way mirror beside him, indicating for him to see for himself. In the interrogation room, sitting behind the table, was a middle-aged man with a pale face. He was being interrogated with his head lowered and confessed to all his crimes. "What's going on?" Ai Qing turned around, her eyes gloomy. "Who is that?" "My family is unfortunate." Qi Wen lowered his eyes and sighed sadly. "That's my nephew, Qi Pei. He was raised by me since he was young, and he's smart and capable. I trusted him so much and entrusted him with important tasks, but I didn't expect that bastard to be so blinded by greed. He actually colluded with that group of evil cultists and did so many ugly things. At this point, he was so angry that he almost couldn't breathe. Now that things have come to this, even I can't help him hide it. Director Fu, Xiao Qing, please don't mind an old man like me. I will enforce the law impartially." He sighed sadly. Qi Pei brought about his own downfall. He can't blame anyone else. Ai Qing didn't say anything else. She didn't even think about going in to find any loopholes. There were simply too many scapegoats like this. In the collection of 10,000 sins, Scapegoats were a type of professional service. From the lowest level of scapegoats to the highest level of customization, they could even change a person from the inside out through implanting memories, catalyzing origin substances, and altering their consciousness. They could even make the person believe that they were a criminal. There would also be a team of specialized legal experts and criminal consultants who would help the employer clean up every detail and mistake from the inside out, completing all the processes so that a criminal would be completely perfect. For at least 20 million USD, they could make someone else take responsibility for all of their crimes. They could even make someone else take action in their place, even if it was to assassinate the President of the United States. No matter how much they interrogated him, it wouldn't be of any use. Instead, it would help Chi-Wen clear himself of all suspicion. All he would have to bear was the stain of a bad judge of character, as well as the reputation of placing righteousness before family. After getting rid of the last person in the know, just as he had planned, he was able to extricate himself from this quagmire and find a way out for himself from the pursuit of the Astronomical Association and the Special Investigations Department. In the interrogation room, the perpetrator nodded his head mechanically, taking responsibility for all of the crimes on himself. No matter if it was 7 years ago, when he had lured the Huai couple away with a donation and then murdered them, or when he had collaborated with the purified citizens, he had taken responsibility for every single one of them. He had even confessed to many accomplices and undiscovered matters. This confession was like the art of flowing water. It was very pleasing to watch, and every sentence was filled with unexpected twists and suspense. It was enough to occupy the main plot of a novel. At the same time, he had built a high wall for Chi-Wen. It was flawless. Ai Ching didn't say anything else. She watched calmly, almost indifferently, as this farce came to an end. She watched as Chi-Wen shook off all of the dirt on his body and became clean and white again, just like an old dog that had come ashore. It wasn't until he walked out of the interrogation room that Ai Ching, who was standing at the door, spoke. "Do you think you can get rid of everything that happened to you just like that?" she asked coldly. "Or are you saying that no one will find out about what you did in the past? You need evidence to speak. Shao Qing, do you have evidence?" Chi-Wen shook his head helplessly and sighed. "It's really sad that you have such a deep misunderstanding of Third Uncle. After so many years, Third Uncle has watched you grow up. Don't you know what kind of person Third Uncle is?" As such, he smiled helplessly and dotingly. When he looked down at her cold expression, the corners of his mouth curled up into a happy smile. In the gradually empty corridor, he reached out and took a copper pipe from Heluo's hand. He slowly lit a cigar, took a deep breath, and exhaled a scornful mist. "Actually, it doesn't matter. So what if they find out? Come after me? Don't joke around. Tomorrow afternoon, Jinling's Social Security Bureau will hold a bid for the border of Penghu. I will definitely win, even without the Yin family. At that time, I will be the person who controls the lifeline of Penghu." Chi-Wen watched as Chi Pei, who had surrendered, was escorted to the prison. He casually waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "Even if something happens, even the Special Affairs Division can only clear my name. What can the Astronomy Society do to an innocent old man who was deceived by a cult?" He retracted his gaze and looked at the girl in front of him with pity. "Shao Qing, you're still too young and inexperienced." Ai Qing was expressionless. She only asked back, "Do you think you can go to Jinling tomorrow?" "It's not a thought, it's a fact." Chi-Wen was full of confidence. "If you think you can use the power of the Astronomy Society to make me stay, you can try." Ai Qing angrily clenched her walking stick. In the end, she didn't say anything. "Don't be sad, and don't show such an angry look." Chi-Wen shook his head and sighed softly. "Isn't your great-grandfather the best example? I started from the age of 29 and followed him for 20 years. I only learned one thing, and that is, the winner takes all. As he spoke, he raised his hand and told her seriously and solemnly through the wisp of smoke, "This is the truth of this world." Ai Ching looked at him indifferently. "I'm not stupid enough to listen to an old dog story. Mr. Qi, you don't have to waste your time with me." Regarding this, Qi Wen only smiled tolerantly. Finally, he tidied up his suit. He raised his hand and gently brushed the dust off her shoulder. "Do you remember what third uncle told you?" He bent down and whispered mockingly in the girl's ear, "Children who leave home have to suffer." Qi Wen ignored Ai Ching and turned to leave. He walked towards the door of the Special Affairs Division. The road was smooth. At the door, He Luo had already held an umbrella for him, but his footsteps stopped on the steps. He raised his head and looked at the gloomy sky. In the dim and pale clouds, the rain continued to fall to the earth. It was like in the past. The first time he came to this city, it was the same disgusting scene. From then on, he hated this decaying city. Qi Wen retracted his gaze and walked into the car. He Luo put away the umbrella and returned to the driver's seat. He turned around and asked, "Boss, are we going home or to the company?" "No, we're going directly to Jinling." Qi Wen raised his eyes slightly. "Yin Qing, that little girl, is just like her great-grandfather in her bones, enduring silently, but she definitely doesn't lack courage. No, it should be said that she has the courage to act recklessly, right? I deliberately provoked her today, but she was able to hold back. In the end, she didn't use any of her backup methods. But if we go back like this, she'll use the authority of the Astronomical Society to investigate tonight. Even if she doesn't find anything, she'll forcefully take me away to cooperate with the questioning. It won't take too long, just 20 hours. It'll be enough to make all my previous efforts go to waste." He Luo was stunned. "What about Xiao Yuan?" "Don't worry, he's already been arranged to be in a safe place." Even to his confidant, Qi Wen didn't reveal his entire plan. He was even more guarded. "Did you make the arrangements last night?" He Luo nodded. "Very good. We'll go to the south of the city first, then take the Xinjiang highway." Qi Wen said slowly, "Arrange for people to take the sea route. Also, remember to keep that thing well." He Luo nodded knowingly. After a series of orders were passed down through He Luo and the secretary in the front passenger seat, Qi Wen slowly narrowed his eyes. After preparing for so many years, it's time to turn things around. From today onwards, no one would be able to make him his lackey. In the gradually thickening curtain of rain, the motorcade disappeared into the gradually dimming light on the horizon. It was as if they were drowned in darkness. Qi Wen gradually fell asleep. After a long time, he suddenly opened his eyes. He opened his eyes. The car stopped. Chapter 67. The entire Special Affairs Division was completely silent. Everyone felt as if a volcano was about to erupt. When they passed by the director's office, they all tiptoed. They were afraid that the slightest noise would trigger the bomb inside and drown them in anger. "You're scaring them." Director Fu sighed helplessly. He looked at the shadows that quietly floated by the unlatched door and poured a cup of tea for the girl in front of him. "What are you afraid of? You're afraid of a cripple like me?" Ai Ching seemed to be amused, but there was no trace of a smile on her face or in her eyes. "Don't worry, no matter how bad it is, I won't make a scene in the Special Affairs Division. No, I just want to persuade you to calm down." Director Fu shook his head. He wanted to smoke, but he seemed to have thought of something. After hesitating for a long time, he finally rolled up his sleeves and put a nicotine patch on his arm. "Whether it's the Astronomy Society or the Social Security Bureau, in the end we still have to follow the rules. Since there are rules, there will definitely be things that are not happy. You don't need to put too much pressure on yourself. To be honest, I'm not worried about Qi Wen." Ai Ching sneered indifferently. "No matter how much he looks like a person, he still has the habits of a dog in his bones. Just because he has a few bones, he will carry them around and show them off. If he is content with staying in a corner, the Yin family can't do anything to him for the time being. But he actually wants to jump into the quagmire of Jinling. He doesn't even think about it. No matter how powerful he is he as powerful as the Hui family in the past? In less than 2 years, he would be completely devoured by those aristocratic families. At that time, he would probably have to thank the Yin family for sparing his life out of consideration for their past relationship, right? What I'm worried about is the people who are purified. In this matter, Qi-Wen is not the key, but the problem is that all the clues we could find were all destroyed by Qi-Wen, that bastard who thinks he's smart. She knocked on the armrest expressionlessly. Now, other than a pile of corpses and ruins, we only have a Boolsh *T prophecy poem in our hands. Under such circumstances, if those fellows really make any moves, we're simply sitting ducks. Director Fu didn't say anything. He just anxiously rolled up his sleeves and put on 2 more nicotine patches. After so many days, whether it was the internal announcement or the private communication between colleagues, they had almost all learned about the situation around them and the large-scale mobilization of the pure people that had not happened in recent years. Not only Xin Hai, more than 8 cities had also discovered the anomaly. Almost the entire eastern coast of Dongxia had been affected. If they weren't careful, another border war would break out. Who knew how many people would be affected? No one wanted sparks to break out in their own jurisdiction, whether it was from the perspective of duty or professional life. However, this was not the only thing that made Ai Qing feel uneasy. There was something else that made her frustrated and even angry. Just like when you forgot to bring your keys or turn off the faucet, the premonition lingered around. When you knew that your damn intuition was about to start working again, it was hard to feel good. Although this talent was appreciated by many, few people could understand how much Ai Qing hated it. Especially when you didn't know when the shoe upstairs would drop, it made her hate it even more. This anxiety curled around her mind until a certain moment, she finally found the source of this anomaly. She stood up abruptly, grabbed the walking stick, and walked back to the door of the interrogation room. She looked around. The corridor was empty, and there were trash cans everywhere. The ashtray on top of the trash cans was filled with a small bottle that looked like an eyesore. Ai Qing reached out to pick up the bottle that was about the size of a thumb. There was still a drop of light purple liquid left inside. It smelled faintly bitter, like some kind of drug. The test paper that she carried with her showed an orange-red reaction. She could confirm that this was some kind of drug that came from the border. The orange-red color was between the red that represented a stimulant and the yellow that represented a tranquilizer. She looked at Director Fu. Who else was here earlier? Director Fu was confused. He pulled over a random subordinate who had just finished organizing the statement, but the subordinate also looked at them with confusion. Are you talking about Hui Shi? The subordinate thought about it and then turned to Ai Qing. Aren't you guys together? Puh. The bottle shattered on the ground. Finally, when the other boot was finally thrown down from upstairs, Ai Qing realized that other than being stunned and shocked, she actually felt a sense of relief. What's wrong? Director Fu asked. Ai Qing supported herself with her walking stick and waved her hand weakly. Now go and check your personnel. Focus on the armed guards and their weapons. Director Fu trusted and understood Ai Qing. Even though she did not explain anything, he still gave the order according to her request. Soon, after a short search and inventory, the attendance and arrival records for the day were handed over to him. Not a single one of the armed guards was missing. However, there was an error in the attendance record. Someone was missing. Soon, the missing person was found in the cubicle of the toilet. His body was tied with rope and his mouth was sealed with tape. He was struggling with all his might. Old Wang. Director Fu was stunned. As soon as the tape was torn open, Old Wang ignored his violent coughing and shouted loudly, "It's Huai Shi, it's Huai Shi. He took the key to the armory." Really, this is terrible. In a moment of dead silence, Ai Qing leaned against the corner of the wall and closed her eyes tiredly. That bastard. Did he know what he had done? Soon, the shadow of a young man carrying a travel bag was seen walking out of the armory. It was as if he was taking a leisurely stroll. From time to time, he would wave and say hello to acquaintances passing by. He walked all the way out of the Secret Service office unimpeded. He had an automatic rifle, 6 magazines, 2 pistols, 50 pistol bullets, 6 grenades, 2 plastic explosives, and so on. It was like he was shopping in a supermarket. He had returned with a full load. With a calm smile on his face, he hailed a taxi and left silently. Director Fu was going crazy when he saw this. Damn it, if he had known, he would have shot that bastard on the spot. He pulled the sweaty guard over and questioned him loudly. How long has he been gone? 20 minutes. 20 minutes? Even a dog can sense that something is wrong in 20 minutes. Are you worse than a dog? Director Fu was so angry that he almost tore the guard's hand off. Seeing Ai Qing calmly drinking tea next to him, he became even more irritated. Why aren't you anxious at all? What's the use of being anxious? Ai Qing put down her teacup and sighed softly. If we really want to start preparing for something, maybe we can start discussing what style to use for Qi Wen's funeral. 20 minutes? Don't be kidding. It's too late. 20 minutes ago, it was raining cats and dogs. On the viaduct, the taxi sped along, breaking through the layers of rain. Disco songs from more than a decade ago were playing in the car. As the Buddha plate hanging from the rearview mirror rotated, the driver shook his head and hummed along with the song. In the passenger seat, the young man holding a huge travel bag stared blankly at the rain outside the window, as if he was looking at the black birds in the sky. "Young man, this won't do," the driver said. "You've been in the car for half a day and you don't even have a destination. Now that we're almost on the highway, can you at least tell me where you're going? Why don't I find a place for you and you change cars? I'll charge you $20 less." In the silence, the young man just looked out the window quietly, as if he didn't say anything. It was only when the driver couldn't help but ask again that he spoke. "No need, sir. Just leave me here." "On the viaduct? Young man, do you want to die?" The driver looked at him in shock. "You'll lose points if you park here." "It's okay." The young man took out a foldable raincoat from the travel bag and put it on. "When the time comes, just say that you were threatened by me." As he spoke, he unzipped the travel bag and showed the driver the gun and the bronze bullets inside. Suddenly, the driver slammed on the brakes and the taxi stopped on the viaduct, almost causing a rear-end collision and provoking angry honk. The driver's face was pale and he raised his hands. "Young man, please spare me. I still have a family to feed. I only have this much money. If it's not enough, I'll get more." The young man smiled, shook his head, and took out his phone. He scanned the QR code and paid 3 times the price. "Sorry to trouble you." He opened the door with his bag and politely said goodbye. "I wish you a happy life. Goodbye." The door closed. In the heavy rain, the taxi sped up wildly and fled. Huai Shi was left alone in the same place. The thick curtain of rain seemed to swallow everything. Countless raindrops shattered in an instant, setting off a roar as if the world was shattering. Other than that, there was a palpitating silence. Everything became foggy, only the traffic lights under the viaduct were glaring red. The cars coming and going came out of the rain and fog and disappeared into the rain and fog, just like running monsters. And right in the middle of the countless steel monsters, Huai Shi stood in the middle of the viaduct. He bent down and put down the travel bag. One by one, he clipped the pistol, magazine, and bullets to the vest under his raincoat. He sorted them out. These on the left, those on the right, and some in the middle. So it gradually became heavy. so it gradually became full. It was as if he had found his internal organs one by one. They seemed to be beating in his empty lungs. Step by step, he became whole again. His empty body seemed to welcome back the aura of his soul. Until finally, he picked up the heavy automatic rifle and hung it on his shoulder. In a trance, Huai Shi seemed to finally be whole. But it seemed that something was missing, until he finally remembered to put the earphones hanging on his collar into his ears. Then, the rough drumbeat and bass tore apart the noisy silence. Hashalos Thismand? Kanhasir Shebland? The young man tapped his fingers on the gun and hummed softly along with the song. Can he walk all the blood will he fall? Did he still have any sense? Was he blind? Could he still move forward? Or would he fall down as soon as he moved? In the long or short wait, he shook his head along with the rhythm of the drumbeat. He wandered between the rain and the viaduct. Like an invisible soul, he let the heavy cars pass by. It was as if he was waiting for the bell to ring in the distance, until the pitch-black birds once again streaked across the shadows of the rain. He slowly raised the gun in his hand, put it on his shoulder, and removed the safety. Through the rain on his hood, he stared at the outline gradually emerging in the rain. The high beam illuminated his eyes. At that moment, he pulled the trigger. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.